Chapter 1927. The bloodline power that erupted from Shao Chen was familiar to Zhao Yu and the other two because it was the same bloodline power that the heaven-breaking sword sovereign passed down to Shao Chen. Upon sensing the incomparably familiar bloodline power, Qianling's expression changed, and he was the first to exclaim, "This sect master passed down the bloodline power to you?" Previously, Qianling, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui were rather suspicious of Shao Chen. After all, who could prove that Shao Chen was the successor of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign? Could it be just because of the heaven-breaking sword token? Even though the heaven-breaking sword sovereign had set the rule that whoever obtained the heaven-breaking sword token would be the sect master of the sword sect, perhaps many people wouldn't be willing to serve the sword sect as their master with just the heaven-breaking sword token. Previously, they had been suspicious of Shao Chen's identity. But now, after sensing the incomparably familiar bloodline power in Shao Chen's body, their expressions changed. If the heaven-breaking sword token couldn't prove Shao Chen's identity, Shao Chen's bloodline power was undoubtedly enough to prove that Shao Chen was the successor of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign. If not, how could Shao Chen possibly possess the bloodline power of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign? Besides, since the heaven-breaking sword sovereign passed down the bloodline power to Shao Chen, it went to show how highly the heaven-breaking sword sovereign valued Shao Chen. Song Xing's expression changed. Even though he knew from Yang Song that the heaven-breaking sword sovereign had passed down his bloodline power to Shao Chen, Song Xing couldn't help but tear up after personally experiencing the familiar bloodline power. Song Xing couldn't be more familiar with the bloodline power that Shao Chen displayed. At that moment, Song Xing's eyes reddened as he gazed at Shao Chen. There was even an instant when Song Xing mistook him for the heaven-breaking sword sovereign. He thought that the heaven-breaking sword sovereign had returned. But when Song Xing focused his gaze, he realized that the person standing there was still Shao Chen. But even so, Song Xing clenched his fists tightly and swore to himself, "Master, don't worry. I will definitely make him the sect master." Since Shao Chen was the person chosen by the heaven-breaking sword sovereign, then Song Xing would do everything in his power to help him. In Song Xing's eyes, perhaps Shao Chen was his young master. Song Xing transferred all his loyalty to the heaven-breaking sword sovereign to Shao Chen. At the same time, Song Xing looked at Qianling, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui, whose expressions had changed. The powerful aura of the End Realm surged into the sky as he stared coldly at the three of them. "Qianling, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, are the three of you planning to go against the old sect master's orders?" Song Xing's angry roar stunned Qianling, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui. Then, Qianling was the first to come back to his senses. He looked at Shao Chen with a complicated expression and said, "We naturally won't go against the old sect master's orders." Qianling and the other two were naturally very loyal to the heaven-breaking sword sovereign. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so neutral. Actually, the three of them didn't support Shao Chen for two simple reasons. First, they didn't believe in Shao Chen's identity. Second, they felt that Shao Chen wasn't qualified to be the sect master of the sword sect. After all, as the sect master, the glory of the sword sect would be firmly tied to Shao Chen. To be honest, Qianling and the other two weren't willing to hand over the entire sword sect to such a young brat who was only in the immortal emperor realm. Because of this, the three of them chose to remain neutral. However, now that Shao Chen had displayed the bloodline power that the heaven-breaking sword sovereign had passed to him, there was no need to doubt Shao Chen's identity. After all, unless it was the heaven-breaking sword sovereign himself, no one could take away his bloodline power. As a result, Shao Chen's bloodline power was naturally something that the heaven-breaking sword sovereign had willingly passed to Shao Chen. As a result, Shao Chen was indeed the heaven-breaking sword sovereign's successor. There was no need to doubt Shao Chen's identity anymore. At this moment, many experts of the sword sect, especially the elders of the sword sect, looked at Shao Chen in a different light. Just as Yang Song had said before, Xiao Chen possessed the heaven-breaking sword sovereign's bloodline power. This would be of great help to Xiao Chen becoming the sect master of the sword sect. This was akin to the heaven-breaking sword sovereign personally telling everyone that Xiao Chen was the sect master of the sword sect from now on. With the heaven-breaking sword sovereign present, Xiao Chen would face much less resistance. The disciples did not react in any particular way. After all, they did not have many opportunities to interact with the heaven-breaking sword sovereign in the first place. However, the elders and above were greatly moved by the bloodline power that Xiao Chen had displayed. In particular, Qian Ling had spoken at a time like this. He would not go against the heaven-breaking sword sovereign's orders. Didn't that mean that Qian Ling had accepted Xiao Chen as the sect master? Qian Ling looked at Xiao Chen with mixed feelings. He ignored Zhao Yu and Li Sui and bowed to Xiao Chen. "Greetings, sect master." Qian Ling's action undoubtedly meant that he had acknowledged Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen disregarded their previous enmity and personally helped Qian Ling up. Xiao Chen said, "Senior, I cannot accept such a great bow. I will need your help in the future." "Of course, I will do my best for you, sect master," said Qian Ling seriously. Qian Ling also acknowledged Xiao Chen. Zhao Yu and Li Sui were clearly still hesitating. Song Xing was prepared to strike while the iron was hot when he saw their conflicted expressions. He would make the two of them make their choice while Qian Ling was making his choice. However, just as Song Xing was about to speak, a cold shout suddenly rang out. "I do not agree with this child becoming the sect master." He Ying's figure appeared before everyone. A cold smile flashed through Xiao Chen's eyes when he saw He Ying. "He's finally here." He Ying's appearance was inevitable, so Xiao Chen was not surprised. It was the first time he had met He Ying face to face. Xiao Chen looked at He Ying and He Ying looked at Xiao Chen. Soon, He Ying spoke. "I do not agree." "He Ying, are you going against the sect master's wishes?" shouted Song Xing coldly when he heard He Ying's words. However, He Ying was not angered by Song Xing's shout at all. He only said indifferently, "Song Xing, don't try to flatter me. I, He Ying, have absolutely no intention of going against the Sword Sovereign. However, the current situation of the Sword Sect is not suitable for this child to become the sect master." Of course, He Ying would never admit that he was disobeying Sword Venerable Potion's orders. After all, even though Sword Venerable Potion was already dead, his prestige in Sword's Gate was still unmatched. If someone were to openly admit that they were disobeying Sword Venerable Potion, even Zhao Yu and Li Sui, who were still hesitating, would not agree to it. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations. Chapter 1928. He Ying didn't dare to openly go against Sword Supreme Potion. When he heard his words, Song Xing laughed coldly. What a joke. Since Sword Supreme chose Xiao Chen, then Xiao Chen will be the new sect leader of the Sword Sect. He knew what He Ying was thinking. This fellow had been eyeing the sect leader position for a long time. Song Xing was very clear about this. However, when he heard Song Xing's words, He Ying said, "Song Xing, I didn't say that I wouldn't recognize Xiao Chen as the sect leader. However, with the current situation of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen isn't suitable. We can let Xiao Chen join the Sword Sect for now. Once his cultivation increases, he can take the sect leader position. I think no one will object." When he said this, He Ying's meaning was clear. With Xiao Chen's age and cultivation as the reason, He Ying wanted Xiao Chen to take the sect leader position a few years later. When he heard He Ying's words, a cold light flashed across Song Xing's eyes. A few years later? Haha, what a joke. He Ying was just stalling for time. If he didn't agree to Xiao Chen becoming the sect leader now, would He Ying agree in a few years? As for Xiao Chen's age and cultivation, that was just an excuse. According to what He Ying said, what level did Xiao Chen have to raise his cultivation to be qualified to be the sect leader of the Sword Sect? Did he have to raise his cultivation to the end realm like the two of them? When that time came, it would be too late. Shao Chen was now in the immortal emperor realm. No matter how talented Shao Chen was or how many treasures he had, it wasn't something that could be done in a day. Therefore, Song Xing definitely wouldn't agree to He Ying's words. Song Xing coldly looked at He Ying and laughed coldly. He Ying, you don't have to say these high-sounding reasons. Since Shao Chen is the Sword Supreme's choice, then the sect leader position will naturally be his. What a few years! Song Xing naturally wouldn't believe He Ying's words. However, when he heard this, He Ying seemed to have expected such an outcome. Since that's the case, then let's see if everyone agrees to this kid becoming the sect leader of the Sword Sect or not. Song Xing's rejection was within He Ying's expectations. After he said this, He Ying looked at the people in his faction. In an instant, many people opened their mouths and expressed their agreement with He Ying's suggestion. He Ying didn't immediately reject Shao Chen's identity. Instead, he used Shao Chen's age as an excuse to ask Shao Chen to take the sect leader position a few years later. However, whether it was Song Xing or Shao Chen, they both knew that if they didn't succeed today, then they wouldn't succeed in the future. This was just an excuse for He Ying. He Ying's faction supported He Ying's suggestion. Of course, Song Xing's faction also spoke up to support Shao Chen becoming the sect leader of the Sword Sect. The two factions were quickly locked in a heated argument, and the smell of gunpowder in the air grew increasingly intense. As for Zhao Yu, Li Sui and the rest of the neutral faction, they did not participate in the argument, and only watched the show from the side. While the two factions were quarreling, Shao Chen, who had been silent all this time, suddenly walked up to He Ying and said with a cold smile on his face, "Vice sect leader He Yuan Lin and the rest still haven't returned. Aren't you worried at all?" Shao Chen had nothing to say to He Ying. Whether He Ying agreed or not didn't matter to Shao Chen. Shao Chen wanted to take He Ying down today, so whether He Ying agreed or not didn't matter to Shao Chen. When he heard Shao Chen's words, a cold glint flashed across He Ying's eyes. Yuan Lin still hadn't returned, and He Ying was naturally suspicious. Furthermore, he had already sent people to investigate. Unfortunately, the people he sent were like stones that sank into the sea, and they still hadn't returned. In fact, He Ying had already guessed that Yuan Lin and the rest, as well as the people he sent to investigate, were probably no longer in this world. Furthermore, He Ying guessed that all of this was related to Shao Chen. It had to be said that He Ying's guess was correct. Yuan Lin was killed by Nangong Guan, and Nangong Guan had also guessed that He Ying would definitely send people to investigate after not hearing any news about Yuan Lin. Therefore, Nangong Guan had already ordered family Nangong's experts to secretly set up ambushes around Nangong City. As long as He Ying's people arrived in Nangong City, they would be killed on the spot. Therefore, the people He Ying sent to investigate Yuan Lin were already dead. Therefore, He Ying naturally didn't know what happened in Nangong City. A cold glint flashed across his eyes, but he quickly hid it. He looked deeply at Shao Chen and said indifferently, "Of course I'm worried. However, the current situation has nothing to do with Yuan Lin." He Ying didn't know what Shao Chen wanted to do, and he also didn't know what Shao Chen was relying on. In fact, He Ying had already felt that something was wrong. After all, Yuan Lin and the rest had disappeared, and He Ying had no choice but to prepare for the worst. After hearing He Ying's words, Shao Chen didn't continue to argue with him. He turned his head to look at Zhao Yu and Li Sui. "Seniors, what do you mean? Are you willing to follow Sword Sovereign Potion's orders, or do you want to be like He Ying and stop me?" After hearing Shao Chen's words, Zhao Yu and Li Sui were silent. Qian Ling had already acknowledged Shao Chen, but the two of them were still hesitating. Seeing this, Shao Chen smiled and didn't continue to ask. Instead, he turned around and looked at the crowd below, the numerous elders, deacons, and disciples of the Sword Sect. Looking down from above, Shao Chun swept his gaze across everyone. Then, he slowly raised the Heaven Splitter sword token in his hand and said loudly to everyone present. The sword sect was single-handedly established by Sword Sovereign Patian. The one who holds the Heaven Splitter sword token is the Sword Sect Master. This is Sword Sovereign Potion's order. Now, as the Sword Sovereign's successor and the new sect master of the Sword Sect, I naturally won't allow any rascals to disobey Sword Sovereign Potion's order. Now, as the sect master of the Sword Sect, I will abolish He Ying's position as the vice sect master. Shao Chun didn't say much to He Ying. This guy liked to argue and confuse others. However, Shao Chun didn't care about that. If you like to argue, go ahead. I will abolish your position as the vice sect master in front of everyone. As soon as Shao Chun finished his sentence, everyone was stunned. At the same time, He Ying couldn't help but burst into laughter. Haha, Shao Chun, you want to abolish my position as the vice sect master? This is ridiculous. You aren't even the sect master of the Sword Sect yet. What rights do you have to abolish me? Please add vote recommend. Chapter 1929. Shao Chun had stripped He Ying of his position as the vice sect leader in front of everyone. He Ying laughed heartily in response, while the other experts of the Sword Sect had strange expressions on their faces. In their opinion, Shao Chun must have lost his mind. Although Shao Chun was the successor of the Heaven-Breaking Sword Sovereign and possessed the Heaven-Breaking Sword token, his position as the sect leader had yet to be recognized by everyone. With Shao Chun's current status in the Sword Sect, it was simply wishful thinking for him to strip He Ying of his position. Could it be that this kid has lost his mind and gone crazy? An elder from He Ying's faction sneered. Shao Chun, who thought that he could strip He Ying of his position with just a few words, was simply a fool's dream. Following He Ying's outburst, everyone present looked at Shao Chun with a strange expression. However, Shao Chun did not seem to care at all. He turned his head to look at He Ying as a sneer appeared at the corners of his mouth. He Ying, you have openly disobeyed the orders of the Heaven-Breaking Sword Sovereign and were disrespectful to the sect leader. You even attempted to disobey the orders of the sect leader. You shall be punished by the heavens, Shao Chun said indifferently, completely ignoring the expressions of everyone present. Hearing this, He Ying was stunned. Does he want to kill me? Although he was suspicious, He Ying could not figure out where Shao Chun's confidence came from. Could it be because of Tsang Xing? Thinking of this, He Ying unconsciously looked at Tsang Xing. However, he quickly shook his head inwardly. Although Tsang Xing's strength was not weak, it was impossible for him to kill He Ying alone. He Ying did not know where Shao Chun's confidence came from. However, Tsang Xing quickly bowed respectfully to Shao Chun and said, "Yes, sect leader." As he spoke, Tsang Xing's gaze landed on He Ying. At the same time, 3 terrifying auras descended from the sky. Immediately, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Xiao Xiao appeared. As the 4 of them appeared, He Ying's expression finally changed. Looking at the 4 of them, He Ying said solemnly, "Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, Wu Huan." He Ying wasn't unfamiliar with Nangong Guan and the other 2. After all, they were all End Realm experts like him. He Ying didn't expect the 3 of them to appear here at the same time. Hearing He Ying's words, Nangong Guan sneered, "He Ying, Shao Chun is our junior brother." Now that things had progressed to this point, there was no point in hiding it anymore, so Nangong Guan indifferently said. Hearing this, He Ying looked at Shao Chun in disbelief. Nangong Guan's junior brother? In that case, wouldn't Shao Chun's master be Jun Wuya? Nangong Guan and the other 3 were all disciples of Jun Wuya. Many people in the Great Thousand World knew this, and He Ying was no exception. However, he didn't expect that not only was Shao Chun the successor of the Heaven-Breaking Sword Sovereign, he was also Jun Wuya's disciple. Along with Nangong Guan's words, He Ying's doubts were completely resolved. He finally understood where Xiao Chen's confidence came from. Also, why hadn't there been any news of Yuan Lin and the others for so long? They had probably been killed by Xiao Chen, and the person who killed them was probably Nangong Guan. He Ying didn't expect that Xiao Chen was actually Jun Wuya's disciple. Not only was He Ying shocked, but the expressions of the other sword sect experts also changed. Jun Wuya's name was like thunder in the great thousand world. Very few people didn't know him. Looking at the shocked He Ying, Xiao Chen said indifferently, "Let's do it." Abolishing He Ying's position as vice sect master and killing He Ying in front of everyone was something that Xiao Chen had planned from the start. As for whether or not anyone in the sword sect supported him, Xiao Chen didn't care about that. In any case, he didn't expect them to support him. He Ying had to die, and the purpose of killing him in front of everyone was to intimidate the others and let them know how decisive Xiao Chen was when it came to killing people. As soon as Xiao Chen finished speaking, Song Xing immediately attacked. Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wang Huan also quickly joined the battle. The four of them joined forces to besiege He Ying, and He Ying immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. Seeing the four of them surrounding He Ying, the elders of He Ying's faction couldn't help but want to join in. However, Yang Song had already appeared in front of them and looked at them coldly. The sect master has ordered that anyone who dares to move will die. As one of the 5 great sword leaders, Yang Song naturally had a strong deterrent force. Hearing this, those who wanted to join in the fray immediately dispelled the idea. At the same time, the way they looked at Xiao Chen changed. He had thought that Xiao Chen was just a brat, but who would have thought that Xiao Chen would be so ruthless? He wanted to kill He Ying right from the start, and there was no reason for him to do so. He was simply overbearing. The crimes that Xiao Chen had accused He Yong of were actually not valid at all. This was because He Yong had never acknowledged Xiao Chen's position as sect master. Naturally, there was no such thing as offending a superior. Xiao Chen, as the sect master of the sword sect, had given the order to kill He Ying. But now, in the sword sect, besides Song Xing's faction, how many people had acknowledged Xiao Chen's position? Therefore, Xiao Chen's method was very overbearing, but the experts of the sword sect present didn't dare to refute it. Xiao Chen's meaning was very clear. He didn't need everyone's acknowledgement, but they couldn't deny his position as sect master. If anyone dared to publicly deny it like He Ying, they would end up like He Ying. The elders of He Ying's faction were intimidated by Yang Song and didn't dare to make the slightest move. On the other side, Zhao Yu and Li Sui had strange expressions on their faces. They didn't expect Xiao Chen to be so overbearing. Looking at the two of them, Qianling, who had already made his choice first, said indifferently, "The situation has already been decided, what are you still hesitating for?" Xiao Chen was Jun Wuya's disciple, and he had the support of Nangong Guan and the other 3. Moreover, he had the support of Song Xing's faction in the sword sect. As such, the situation had already been decided. He Ying alone had no way of contending with Xiao Chen. Hearing Qianling's words, Zhao Yu and Li Sui's expressions changed. Then, they revealed bitter smiles and nodded slightly, indeed. With the help of Nangong Guan and the others, as well as Song Xing's support, Xiao Chen no longer needed anyone's acknowledgement. He could forcibly take the position of sect master of the sword sect in an extremely overbearing manner. Looking at He Ying now, after just over 100 moves, under the combined attacks of Song Xing, Nangong Guan, and the other 3, he was already in a terrible state. It was obvious that he wasn't a match for 4 End Realm experts. Against Nangong Guan and Song Xing, it was hard for He Ying to resist. Looking at the haggard He Ying, Xiao Chen looked at Zhao Yu and Li Sui, asking calmly, "The two of you, do you have a choice now? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1930. I'll remember it in 1 second. Interesting, no pop-up window free reading. Ignoring He Ying, who was fighting 1 against 4, Xiao Chen looked at Zhao Yu and Li Sui and asked calmly. Hearing this, Zhao Yu and Li Sui looked at each other and then cupped their hands towards Xiao Chen. Greetings, sect leader. Xiao Chen was not only the successor of the heaven-breaking sword Venerable, but he was also Jun Wuya's disciple. With Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and the others supporting him, Zhao Yu and Li Sui had no other choice but to submit. The two of them weren't fools and knew what the consequences would be if they rejected. He Ying was a good example. Looking at He Ying, he was already in a bad state. Although he still had some strength to resist, facing 4 End Realm experts of the same realm as him, it was only a matter of time before He Ying lost. Lowering his head, he couldn't help but look at He Ying, who was fighting a bloody battle. Zhao Yu and Li Sui were both stunned. Xiao Chen's overbearingness and viciousness were indeed unexpected. They originally thought that Xiao Chen was just a junior, but who would have thought that Xiao Chen would be so overbearing? Zhao Yu and Li Sui both submitted, and Xiao Chen's attitude instantly changed. He smiled as he helped the two up. Xiao Chen smiled and said, "In the future, I will have to rely on the two of you." Xiao Chen's words were very polite, and his attitude was also very humble. However, Zhao Yu and Li Sui didn't dare to be disrespectful, and they hurriedly replied, "Sect leader is too serious." With Nangong Guan and the others here, the 5 of them naturally didn't dare to go against Xiao Chen. However, if the people present knew that Xiao Chen was Jun Wuya's last disciple, their feelings would probably change. In the large world, Jun Wuya had never taken in a true disciple. This wasn't a secret, so everyone in the sword sect naturally thought that Xiao Chen was the same as Nangong Guan and the others, just a disciple in name of Jun Wuya. However, who would have thought that Xiao Chen wasn't Jun Wuya's disciple in name, but his last disciple? If everyone were to know about this, many people, including Zhao Yu and Li Sui, would probably be convinced by him. The reason was simple. Because Xiao Chen was Jun Wuya's last disciple, once Xiao Chen became the sect leader of the sword sect, it would mean that the sword sect was related to Jun Wu. With Jun Wuya's help, the sword sect might once again become one of the top 10 Lingtian sects. This was because the reason why the top 10 Lingtian sects were so strong was because they all had almighty experts who surpassed the End Realm. Whether or not a sect had an almighty expert who surpassed the End Realm was the most basic condition to determine whether or not a sect could become one of the top Lingtian sects. However, within the sword sect, apart from Song Xing and Yang Song, no one else knew about the true relationship between Xiao Chen and Jun Wuya. However, this didn't matter because no matter what, no matter whether or not the sword sect people truly submitted, Xiao Chen relied on his own strength to become the sect leader of the sword sect. As for the other matters, they would talk about it in the future. Looking at He Ying and the others who were still in the intense battle, Xiao Chen didn't say anything to Zhao Yu and the other two. Arrange for people to watch over here. Whoever dares to attack will be treated as He Ying's accomplice and will be killed on the spot. Follow me in. To kill an End Realm expert like He Ying wasn't so easy. They definitely wouldn't be able to do it in a short amount of time. Even if Song Xing and the other 3 worked together, it was still the same. Hence, this battle would probably continue for a period of time. Naturally, Xiao Chen couldn't just wait here. Hence, he called Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Qianling. Xiao Chen and the others walked into the main hall. Within the main hall, Xiao Chen first asked Yang Song to order people to bring Qin Shuru and the other girls, as well as Long Qing, Xian Yuanling, and his parents to rest. Then, Xiao Chen naturally walked to the center of the main hall and sat down on the seat that originally belonged to the sect leader. Yang Song, Zhao Yu, and the other 3 didn't object to Xiao Chen sitting on the main seat. After all, Xiao Chen was already the sect leader of the sword sect. There was nothing wrong with him sitting there. Looking down at the 4 of them, Yang Song and Qianling could be trusted. However, Zhao Yu and Li Sui needed to be observed for a period of time. After a moment of silence, Shao Chen made a rough judgment of the four in his heart. 4 seniors, I don't think anyone will object to me now, right? Shao Chen seemed to be asking, but Yang Song was the first to speak. Sect leader, don't worry. In the future, no one in the sword sect will dare to disobey sect leader in the slightest. Yang Song was the first to speak, followed by Qianling. His meaning was no different from Yang Song's. Seeing Yang Song and Qianling speak one after another, Zhao Yu and Li Sui finally said in unison, Sect leader, don't worry. The two of us will definitely follow sect leader's lead. Shao Chen's words were to force the four to make a statement. After all, Shao Chen had just taken the position of sect leader. Although the people in the sword sect might not dare to say anything due to the deterrence of Nangong Guan and the other 3, the sword sect wasn't stable. It was very easy for chaos to break out. This was obviously something Shao Chen didn't want to see. Therefore, during this time, Shao Chen could only rely on Song Xing, Yang Song, Zhao Yu, Qianling, and Li Sui. With the prestige these people had in the sword sect, he could quell the storm in the sword sect as soon as possible. Yang Song and the other 3 weren't stupid. They naturally knew what Shao Chen meant. Shao Chen's decision was indeed the best choice. If Shao Chen didn't do anything and just killed He Ying and took the position of sect leader by force, perhaps they wouldn't dare to say anything in the short term. However, if they still couldn't unite after a long time, then the sword sect might very well be torn apart. This wasn't something Shao Chen wanted to see. Shao Chen was very satisfied with their answers. He smiled faintly. Then, Shao Chen opened his mouth. A single sentence from him shocked the 4 of them. Actually, I know that one has to be strong to forge iron. I know that perhaps I'm still young and my cultivation isn't enough. However, since Senior Patian has handed the sword sect to me, then I'll definitely not allow the sword sect to continue declining. In this lifetime, I'll definitely lead the sword sect back into the top 10 heaven-defying sect. Perhaps you don't believe me, but it's fine. I'll use my actions to prove it to you in the future. Moreover, I intend to let Master Jun Weia be the ancestor of the sword sect. What do the 4 of you think? Let Jun Weia be the ancestor of the sword sect? Yang Song wasn't too surprised when he heard this. However, Zhao Yu, Qianling, and Li Sui were instantly stunned. All of them looked at Shao Chen with disbelief. The 3 of them naturally didn't have any objections to Jun Weia being the ancestor. This was absolutely beneficial to the sword sect. However, was this possible? Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 1931. Shao Chen said that he wanted Jun Weia to be the old ancestor of the sword sect. Shao Chen naturally didn't discuss this matter with Jun Weia, so Shao Chen didn't even know where Jun Weia was. However, in order to quickly stabilize the situation within the sword sect, Shao Chen had no choice but to make a suitable lie. Or rather, pull on Jun Weia's tiger flag. Actually, this was something that couldn't be helped. To be honest, Shao Chen was helpless because with his cultivation, he was too weak to be the sect leader of the sword sect. Moreover, he was so weak that it wasn't just a little bit. To put it bluntly, the deacons of the sword sect had the same cultivation as Shao Chen. For the deacons to have the same cultivation as the sect leader, this was indeed a very awkward matter. As such, Shao Chen had no choice but to use all the resources around him. The reason why he said that he wanted Jun Weia to be the old ancestor of the sword sect was because Shao Chen wanted to give everyone hope that the sword sect could rise up again. To put it bluntly, apart from He Ying's faction, everyone else in the sword sect, including Zhao Yu and Li Sui, were extremely loyal to the sword sect. This was something that was undeniable. It was also because of their loyalty to the sword sect that Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and most of the experts in the sword sect felt that he wasn't suitable to be the sect leader. Not for other reasons, but because Xiao Chen's cultivation was too low. If Xiao Chen had end-realm cultivation, there would probably be very few people who would object. Cultivation and age were the biggest obstacles for Xiao Chen to become the sect leader of the Sword Sect. In a short period of time, Xiao Chen couldn't solve this problem. After all, one's cultivation wasn't something that could be raised as one wished, and it was impossible for one to reach the heavens in one step. As such, Xiao Chen wanted to pull on Jun Wuya's tiger flag to let the experts in the Sword Sect see hope. He wanted to see the hope that he would bring to the Sword Sect after becoming the sect leader. Only after seeing hope could Xiao Chen find a way to make everyone in the Sword Sect submit and stabilize the situation in the Sword Sect. After he said that, Xiao Chen smiled and looked at the four people below. After a short moment of silence, Zhao Yu said hesitantly, "Sect leader, will Emperor agree?" Zhao Yu's question was considered tactful. In fact, Zhao Yu didn't think that Jun Wuya would return to the Sword Sect to be an old ancestor. This was because Jun Wuya hadn't joined any forces for so many years. Even when the Sword Sect was at its most glorious, Sword Sovereign Patian personally invited Jun Wuya to join the Sword Sect. When the time came, both of them would be old ancestors and wouldn't be in charge of the sect. However, Jun Wuya rejected both offers. Jun Wuya had been roaming the wild for his entire life, which was why Zhao Yu didn't believe Xiao Chen's words. Facing Zhao Yu's doubts, Xiao Chen wasn't flustered at all. Instead, he smiled and said, "Senior, you don't have to worry about that. Actually, I'm not one of Master's disciples," Xiao Chen said with a smile. Upon hearing that Xiao Chen wasn't Jun Wuya's in-name disciple, Zhao Yu and Li Sui's eyes glinted in thought. Could it be that we're wrong? Zhao Yu and Li Sui were dubious. But shortly after, Xiao Chen continued. "I'm Master's closed-door disciple, and I'm different from my senior brothers." Xiao Chen took the initiative to reveal that he was Jun Wuya's closed-door disciple. As a matter of fact, this couldn't be helped. Since he had already pulled Jun Wuya's tiger flag, he might as well do it more thoroughly. As soon as Xiao Chen finished his words, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Qian Ling were taken aback. They didn't expect Xiao Chen to be Jun Wuya's closed-door disciple at all. The three of them were astonished. At this moment, Yang Song spoke. "Sect leader is indeed Jun Wuya's closed-door disciple. Therefore, Jun Wuya will most likely agree if sect leader asked. After all, the patriarch is only an idle and nominal disciple and doesn't have much influence on Jun Wuya." Upon hearing Yang Song's words, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Li Sui nodded subconsciously. Indeed, if Xiao Chen was Jun Wuya's closed-door disciple, there would be a huge chance. After all, a closed-door disciple and an in-name disciple were two entirely different concepts. For a moment, the way Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Qian Ling looked at Xiao Chen completely changed. Just because of a small lie, the three of them actually felt that Xiao Chen becoming the Sword Sect's sect leader might be a fortunate thing for the Sword Sect. First of all, Xiao Chen's cultivation was definitely top-notch. He had broken through to the immortal Emperor realm at such a young age. Secondly, Xiao Chen's background was powerful and orthodox. Not only had the heaven-breaking Sword Lord personally chosen his successor to become the new sect master of the Sword's Gate, but the final disciple of Jun Wuya was also chosen as well. If Xiao Chen were to become the new sect master of the Sword's Gate, then the Sword's Gate might actually be able to rise to prominence. Moreover, judging from Xiao Chen's performance today, he was indeed a genius of his generation. He was shrewd and decisive in handling matters. There was nothing to nitpick about him. Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Li Sui's mentality changed at this moment. If they were forced to submit to Xiao Chen in the past due to pressure, then now, they had truly begun to accept Xiao Chen in their hearts. Although they weren't completely convinced, at least there was a change. As long as this was the case, Xiao Chen would have a way to make them truly submit to him. Xiao Chen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The change in the mentality of Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Li Sui was definitely good news for him. Right now, apart from the dead Yuan Lin, the four sword sect capitals had already submitted to Shao Chen. Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Li Sui's hearts were about to be captured by Shao Chen. Everything was going according to Shao Chen's plan. Shao Chen chatted with Zhao Yu and the others in the hall for around 2 hours before returning to the dwelling that Song Xing had specially prepared for Shao Chen. This dwelling used to belong to the heaven-breaking sword sovereign, but it now belonged to Shao Chen. It was the best dwelling in the entire sword sect. It was on the main peak. Shao Chen's dwelling was the only dwelling on the main peak. On the two sides were Song Xing's and He Ying's dwellings. However, He Ying's dwelling was probably going to be empty soon. After returning to the dwelling, Long Qing, Xian Yuanling, and Qin Shuru were all anxiously waiting. When they saw Shao Chen return, Long Qing was the first to ask anxiously, "How was it?" Everyone was very concerned about whether or not Shao Chen could control the sword sect. Hearing this, Shao Chen smiled and said, "Everything went well. Up until now, everything had been going according to Shao Chen's plan. In fact, it was even better than Shao Chen had expected. Zhao Yu, Li Sui's, and Li Sui's attitudes had changed. This made Shao Chen the happiest thing. If he could obtain their full support, then it wouldn't be too difficult for Shao Chen to control the sword sect. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1932. Hearing Shao Chen's words, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Based on the current situation, Shao Chen could be considered to have stabilized his position in the sword sect. Song Xing, Yang Song, and the other 3 sword heads all supported Shao Chen. As long as the 5 of them supported him, the people below him wouldn't dare to oppose him. As for their dissatisfaction, Shao Chen would slowly deal with it in the future. They all heaved a sigh of relief. However, this joy didn't last for long. Late at night, Song Xing, Nangong Guan, Wu Huan, and Zhou Song hurriedly found Shao Chen. Originally, he was still cultivating. When he heard that Song Xing and the other 3 were looking for him, Shao Chen hurriedly rushed to the front hall. The moment he walked in, Song Xing directly knelt in front of Shao Chen. Seeing this, Shao Chen didn't understand the situation, but he still helped Song Xing up and asked curiously, "Senior, what are you doing? I didn't do my job well. Please punish me, sect leader." Facing Shao Chen's question, Song Xing said with a face full of self-blame, "Punish? What was going on?" Seeing this, Shao Chen looked towards Nangong Guan and the other 2. Facing Shao Chen's gaze, Nangong Guan felt a little embarrassed, but she still braced herself and said, "Junior brother, He Ying ran away." "Ran away?" Hearing Nangong Guan's words, Shao Chen was stunned. 4 End Realm experts had surrounded He Ying and fought for close to a day and a night. In the end, He Ying actually ran away? He didn't think that this would happen. Also, He Ying running away wasn't good news for Shao Chen. However, looking at Song Xing's face full of self-blame, Shao Chen didn't scold him. In other words, Shao Chen didn't blame Song Xing at all. This was because from Song Xing's somewhat haggard appearance, Shao Chen knew that Song Xing had already done his best. Furthermore, ever since he received the Heaven Sundering Sword token, Song Xing had always supported him without hesitation. Towards such a core subordinate, how could Shao Chen blame him for such a matter? Shao Chen feigned a carefree smile and looked towards Song Xing. "Haha, I was wondering what happened. Since He Ying ran away, so be it. Senior brother, you don't have to be upset. Sit down first." He gestured for everyone to sit down. Hearing this, everyone sat down in the front hall. Then, Lu Zhu and Si Ju brewed tea for everyone. After drinking a mouthful of tea, Shao Chen looked towards Song Xing and asked, "Senior, what exactly happened?" Although Shao Chen didn't have any intention of blaming Song Xing, he still had to ask about what happened. Hearing this, Song Xing didn't hide anything and immediately told Shao Chen everything in detail. According to Song Xing, originally, The four of them had surrounded and killed He Ying. After a day of intense battle, He Ying was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. However, just as the four of them thought that He Ying was definitely going to die, no one expected that He Ying would have a space compass on him. This spatial compass can actually be regarded as a mobile teleportation array. It can teleport to any location, or it can be fixed to any teleportation array in the greater thousand worlds between the two realms. This space compass could be said to be the best life-saving item in the Great Thousand World. This was because once the space compass was activated, even an end-realm expert wouldn't be able to interrupt it. Only those whose cultivation had surpassed the end realm would have the power to interrupt the space compass. However, although this space compass was useful, it was also extremely expensive. It even exceeded the price of the Celestial Emperor Dao Core and the Xiantian Emperor Fruit. According to Tsang Xing, even the Sword Sect only had 5 space compasses, and they were all stored in the treasury. No one expected that He Ying would have a space compass on him. At the last moment, He Ying used the space compass and escaped. Tsang Xing and the others didn't know where He Ying was teleported to. After hearing Tsang Xing tell the whole story, Xiao Chen fell into silence. Seeing this, Zhou Song opened his mouth. "Little junior brother, this He Ying must have been prepared." "I think so too. Otherwise, why wouldn't he have a space compass on him?" Hearing this, Wu Huan agreed. He Ying had probably started making preparations after Yuan Lin and the others went missing. On one hand, he had stayed in Sword's Gate to prepare for the final battle. On the other hand, he had also prepared an escape route for himself so that if anything were to happen, he could escape unscathed. Xiao Chen agreed with the speculations of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others. He let out a sigh and laughed self-deprecatingly. "It seems like I underestimated our vice-sect leader He." Xiao Chen had indeed underestimated He Ying. He thought that with Tsang Xing, Nangong Guan, and the other end-realm experts would be able to kill He Ying. However, He Ying was an old monster who had lived for who knows how many years. How could he not be vigilant? Yuan Lin's disappearance was undoubtedly a warning to He Ying. As such, he would definitely leave an escape route for himself. As for why he waited until the last moment to leave, it was because He Ying wanted to make a final gamble. He wasn't willing to give up on his many years of hard work. This was because He Yong knew that once he left the Sword Sect, he probably wouldn't be able to return. As such, He Ying's thoughts were very simple. He wanted to stay and see what trump cards Xiao Chen had. If there was a chance, then he wouldn't leave and wouldn't use his final trump card. However, if he really reached a dead end, then He Ying could only choose to escape and give up on the Sword Sect to save his own life. He still underestimated these old fellows. As expected, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. Wanting to kill someone like He Ying wasn't an easy matter. Hearing Xiao Chen's self-mockery, Tsang Xing said with a face full of shame and self-blame, "It's all this subordinate's fault for being careless. Senior, there's no need to be like this." No one would have thought that He Ying still had such a trump card. Hearing this, Xiao Chen consoled him. Tsang Xing couldn't be blamed for what happened to He Ying. However, since they didn't succeed in killing He Ying, then they couldn't just leave him be. He Ying was still a potential threat. Moreover, as the former vice-sect leader of the Sword Sect, He Ying definitely had some loyal followers in the Sword Sect. These people were still in the Sword Sect. According to Xiao Chen's initial plan, if he could successfully kill He Ying, then it would naturally be easy for him to subdue the people in his faction. However, now that He Ying was fine, then those people who used to follow He Ying would be even more difficult to deal with and subdue. After all, they were loyal to He Ying. As long as He Ying wasn't dead, they would have something to look forward to. He Ying was a problem, and so were the people in He Ying's faction. Xiao Chen had to reconsider how to deal with these people. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1933. He Ying's escape was indeed unexpected to Xiao Chen, and because he failed to kill He Ying, Xiao Chen had to make some adjustments to his plans. The most important thing was how to deal with He Ying's faction. The life and death of He Ying was of utmost importance to the people in He Ying's faction. If He Ying had died, everything would have been fine, and Xiao Chen could have slowly taken them under his wing. But now that He Ying was fine, it was obviously not going to work. It was like a dynasty changing, and a new emperor ascending the throne. It was impossible to keep the old emperor alive. After a moment of silence, Xiao Chen said to Siju, who was standing outside the door, "Go see the 4 sword heads and invite them in." This was a matter of great importance, so Xiao Chen planned to discuss the next deployment with everyone. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Siju nodded and replied, "Yes." Soon, Yang Song and the other 3, who had been summoned by Xiao Chen, rushed over. Led by Siju, they strode into the main hall and bowed to Xiao Chen, who was sitting at the head of the table. "Greetings, Sect Master." Then, they turned to Tsang Xing and bowed, "Greetings, Vice Sect Master." Finally, they bowed to Nangong Guan and the others. "No need to be so courteous, sit." Xiao Chen looked at Yang Song and the others and said indifferently. After the 4 of them were seated, Xiao Chen told them about He Ying's situation. Hearing that He Ying was fine and had even escaped, Yang Song and the others' expressions quickly became gloomy. Then, Li Sui took the lead to speak. "Sect Master, He Ying must have planned this from the beginning, and after he escaped, he must have already found a way out. If this person doesn't appear, then he will definitely be a great threat to our sword sect." Their impression of Xiao Chen had changed, so Li Sui and the other 2 were completely on Xiao Chen's side. As soon as he spoke, Li Sui's guess was the same as everyone else's. Indeed, if one were to say that He Ying was not prepared for this, no one would believe it. But since He Ying was well prepared, it was impossible for him to just plan his escape. He Ying must have planned everything that happened after that. If that was the case, then He Ying would be a much greater threat to Swords Gate and Xiao Chen. Hearing Li Sui's words, Xiao Chen nodded in agreement and said, "Sword Head Li Sui is right. What should we do next?" Xiao Chen asked everyone what they should do next. But after hearing his words, everyone fell into silence. He Ying's matter was indeed a little troublesome and sensitive. No one dared to speak carelessly. Seeing that everyone was silent, Xiao Chen didn't mind. He smiled and said, "Since none of you want to speak, then let me start." Xiao Chen knew that Tsang Xing and the others didn't speak not because they didn't have a choice, but because they were waiting for Xiao Chen to speak first. After all, Xiao Chen had just become the Sword Sect's sect master, and this was the first time he was discussing such an important matter. Naturally, he had to distinguish the priorities. Moreover, regarding He Ying's matter, Xiao Chen's opinion was definitely leading. After all, this was related to Xiao Chen's control over the sword sect. Naturally, no one dared to speak carelessly. As soon as he finished speaking, a cold light flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. "Regarding He Ying's matter, I think we should immediately send out a sword order to all the major forces in the Jian province to pursue He Ying with all their might. At the same time, whoever finds traces of He Ying will be rewarded. Also, whoever dares to hide He Ying, no matter who it is, no matter which force they are from, the Swords Gate will not spare any effort to destroy them. Secondly, regarding He Ying's faction, the elders will imprison all of them. The deacons will send people to monitor them 24 hours a day." Xiao Chen said slowly. As for He Ying, he could only issue a sword order for his arrest. Moreover, Xiao Chen's intuition told him that He Ying hadn't left the Sword Province. The Sword Province was where the Sword Sect was located. Because it was located at the center of the Great Thousand World, the Sword Province was much larger than the South Yu Province where the family Nangong was located. Within the Sword Province there were only 2 first-rate forces. One was the Sword Sect, and the other was the Bloodblade Valley that Xiao Qin had come into contact with. Of course, this was only a temporary measure. They might not be able to find He Ying. However, Xiao Qin wouldn't let He Ying have an easy time. As for He Ying's faction, the elders would imprison all of them. The deacons would send people to monitor them 24 hours a day. First, they would strictly control these people. After that, they would slowly talk about other matters. This matter was of great importance. Therefore, Xiao Qin could only play it safe. After hearing this, Song Xing and the others pondered for a moment before nodding in agreement. Song Xing added, "Sect Master, this is a good idea. Sect Master's method is very good. If it's not enough, I would like to add something else." "Oh, Senior, please speak." Hearing this, Xiao Qin smiled as he looked at Song Xing. At the same time, he thought to himself, sure enough, these people are old and wise. How can they not have any ideas? I was just throwing a brick to attract more jade. In fact, Song Xing already had a detailed plan. When he heard Xiao Qin's words, Song Xing didn't hide it anymore and immediately said. In fact, Song Xing's plan didn't conflict with Xiao Qin's. It could even be said that they were almost the same. However, Song Xing's idea was more meticulous than Xiao Qin's, and he thought further. Song Xing and Xiao Qin had the same idea on these 2 points. However, according to Song Xing's idea, the Sword Sect also needed to spread the news that Xiao Qin had become the new sect master. Firstly, it was to inform the big and small factions of the Jian province that the Sword Sect had a new sect master. This was understandable. Secondly, it was to intimidate the big and small factions of the Jian province through He Ying's matter. As the Sword Sect's influence declined, the Sword Sect's control over the big factions of the Jian province became weaker and weaker. This time, Xiao Qin had just become the new sect master of the Sword Sect. He could take advantage of this opportunity to intimidate these people who were already a little restless. As for the method of intimidating them, it was very simple. He could use He Ying's matter. In any case, He Ying had escaped and the Sword Sect was chasing after him. Using this matter, the Sword Sect would have a reason to act against the big and small factions of the Jian province. Establishing dominance was important for the Sword Sect, but it was even more important for Xiao Qin. Secondly, it was to divert the attention of the disciples of the Sword Sect from the internal struggle for power to other things. By diverting the attention of the Sword Sect from He Ying's escape, Xiao Qin would save the sect master. In this way, it would be easier for Xiao Qin to take control of the Sword Sect. It could be said that it was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. First, it would be to arrest He Ying, intimidating the big and small factions that were already restless. Second, it would be to divert the attention of the Sword Sect, allowing Xiao Qin to smoothly take control of the Sword Sect. Hearing Song Xing's words, Xiao Qin nodded with a smile. It's really fortunate that my Sword Sect has seniored Song Xing, begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1934. Song Xing's words had undoubtedly made up for all the loopholes in Xiao Qin's plan and had also maximized the benefits for Xiao Qin. Hearing Xiao Qin's words, Song Xing smiled, but he didn't have the slightest intention of taking credit. In fact, there were some things that Song Xing didn't say, but everyone present should be able to guess. Since He Ying had already escaped, it was obviously unrealistic to think that a single sword token could capture him. If it was really so simple, then He Ying wouldn't have been able to escape from Song Xing, Nangong Guan, and the other 3's encirclement. Even though they knew that they couldn't capture He Ying, this sword token still had to be sent out. This was because although this sword token was used to inform He Ying, its true purpose wasn't He Ying, but rather the various major forces in Jian province. The Sword Sect had always been the overlord of Jian province, but in recent years, with the rise of Bloodblade Valley, the Sword Sect's influence had declined, and the entire Jian province had basically been divided into 2. The Sword Sect and Blood Blade Valley each controlled half of Jian Province. This originally made the Sword Sect very unhappy, but in recent years, some forces that had always been attached to the Sword Sect had begun to stir, which made the Sword Sect even more unbearable. Therefore, this time, they could take advantage of He Ying's matter to take down a group of forces that had already become disloyal to the Sword Sect, and reorganize the families and sects under them. In addition, they could also establish Xiao Chen's prestige. Everyone understood the reason behind this, so there wasn't the slightest dispute and the matter was settled. That night, everyone took action. First, the elders of He Ying's faction in the Sword Sect didn't even have the time to react before they were directly captured by Yang Song, Zhao Yu, Qianling, and Li Sui and their people and imprisoned in the Sword Prison. He did not harm their lives. He merely sealed their cultivation and imprisoned them. Xiao Chen never thought of killing them. After all, these people were part of the Sword Sect. Killing them would be a huge loss to the Sword Sect. Although he couldn't kill him, he couldn't leave him alone either. Therefore, he had to lock him up first and deal with He Ying later. The elders were all locked up, and the deacons were all placed under house arrest. They were closely monitored 24 hours a day. It was already late at night, but the Sword Sect was bustling with noise and excitement. However, everyone knew that it was the new sect leader who had made his move. Everyone could tell that the people who had been arrested this time were all from He Ying's faction. No one dared to stop them because the ones who took the lead were Yang Song and the other 3 sword heads. Since the 4 sword heads had personally made their move, the people below them naturally couldn't resist. The internal affairs of the Sword Sect were temporarily resolved by Xiao Chen in the most violent way. At the same time, in order to appease the people, Xiao Chen specially ordered Song Xing to pass down an order. This time, the arrest was only targeted at He Ying's faction and no one else. Of course, the captured elders weren't to be killed. As long as they were willing to turn over a new leaf, they could still be released. As soon as the order came out, it did indeed calm the somewhat nervous hearts of many people, especially the many disciples. However, these young and aggressive disciples were still unconvinced by Xiao Chen. It was not important to block him, because sooner or later, Xiao Chen would convince them of his strength. The internal reorganization of the Sword Sect was carried out with great fanfare. Early the next morning, a sword order was issued by the Sword Sect and quickly spread throughout the entire Jian province. In the region controlled by the Sword Sect, the arrest warrant for He Ying was issued in just one day. The major forces that received the sword order were all thinking about different things. The Li family was a major family under the Sword Sect. They weren't weak. However, at this moment, a group of Li family's upper echelons were gathered in the Li family's hall. The Li family's ancestor, who was sitting on the main seat, spoke with a serious expression. The new sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen, actually forced He Ying to step down. Ancestor, do you know where Xiao Chen came from? Hearing this, a Li family expert asked. Hearing this, the Li family's ancestor shook his head. He had never heard of Xiao Chen before. However, since he was able to force He Ying to flee, he couldn't be a simple person. After a moment of silence, the Li family's ancestor said in a deep voice, "Notify everyone to track down He Ying's whereabouts. Once there's any news, report it immediately." Although he didn't know who Xiao Chen was now the sect leader of the Sword Sect. The Li family's ancestor decided to strictly carry out the order of the Sword Sect. The Li family's ancestor was also a shrewd person. He knew that at this time, the new sect leader had just taken office. It was absolutely foolish to provoke Xiao Chen at this time. Moreover, in such an unusual period, the Sword Sect's methods might change. However, the Li family's ancestor didn't know what kind of change it would be, because it all depended on the new sect leader's personality. Perhaps he would become even weaker. In this way, it would be good news for the Li family and the other sects and clans, but on the other hand, he might become even more unyielding. If this was the case, then if anyone dared to feign compliance or even openly refuse to carry out the order, they would undoubtedly be walking towards the muzzle of a spear. The Li family's ancestor wasn't willing to take this risk, so he chose to strictly carry out the order. It had to be said that the Li family's ancestor's decision was very correct. This was because the sword sect's deacon who had come to pass down the order seemed to have left after passing down the order, but in reality, he hadn't. At this moment, the deacon was still in the city where the Li family was located. He wanted to see the Li family's reaction after receiving the order. Of course, he wasn't the only one. All the experts of the sword sect who had gone to pass down the order did the same. They seemed to have left, but they had secretly stayed behind to monitor the actions of the large and small factions that were dependent on the alliance. This was also Xiao Chen's order. He wanted to see which of these factions had already become disloyal, and which of them were still loyal to the sword sect. That day the Li family took action. According to the order, they carried out a strict investigation in the territory controlled by the Li family. Secretly observing all of this, the sword sect's deacon smiled and said, "Old Li, you're finally smart for once. You didn't act foolishly." This deacon of the sword sect was actually a good friend of the Li family's ancestor. Previously, he had secretly warned the Li family's ancestor that the new sect leader's methods were very forceful, and it was best not to court death. Now it seemed that the Li family's ancestor had listened to his advice. This way, the Li family should be safe. Not only would they be fine, they might even be rewarded by the sword sect. As a deacon of the sword sect, this person naturally knew some insider information. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1935. I'll remember it in 1 second. Wonderful, no pop-up window free read. The Li family was very smart and had no intention of going against the sword sect. They were resolute in carrying out the orders of the sword sect. There were many factions like the Li family in the Sword Province. After all, the sword sect had been established in the Sword Province for many years. Although it had declined, its influence was still there. Moreover, the sword sect's attitude was extremely unyielding. Many factions in the Sword Province knew that the sword sect was no joke this time. Most of the sects strictly followed the orders of the sword sect and began to investigate He Ying's whereabouts in their own territories. However, there were those who obeyed and those who disobeyed. The Green Bamboo sect was one of them. The entire Sword Province was divided into two. One half was under the jurisdiction of the sword sect, and the other half was under the jurisdiction of the Bloodblade Valley. The Green Bamboo sect was located at the border of the Bloodblade sect's territory. Perhaps it was because it was very close to the Bloodblade sect's territory that the Green Bamboo sect had long since disobeyed the orders of the sword sect. Listening to orders but not following orders was the current attitude of the Green Bamboo sect towards the sword sect. On the surface, they were still very respectful to the sword sect, but every time the sword sect's orders came, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. There was no follow-up. It was the same this time. After receiving the orders from the sword sect, 3 days had passed. The Green Bamboo sect still did not do anything. They did not even put on an act. They were not even willing to do anything on the surface. All of this was seen by the deacon of the sword sect. The people of the Green Bamboo sect thought that the deacon had already left. However, no one expected that he had not left. Instead, he had been hiding at the foot of the Green Bamboo sect's mountain, watching the Green Bamboo sect's actions. In 3 days, the Green Bamboo sect had not made a single move. The deacon was certain that the Green Bamboo sect had not listened to the sword sect's star. A cold light flashed through the deacon's eyes as he coldly muttered to himself, "You're looking to die." With that, he used a communication talisman to send the situation of the Green Bamboo sect back to the sword sect. 5 days passed. It had been 5 days since the order had been issued. During these 5 days, The actions of the various sects and clans in the Sword Province had naturally been reported back to the Sword Sect. Now, Xiao Chen already had a preliminary judgment about which clan was still loyal to the Sword Gate and which sect was already disloyal to the Sword Gate. Deacon of the Sword Sects to the Sword Sect's orders, at least on the surface, they did not dare disobey the Sword Sect's orders. Xiao Chen could naturally let them off for now. On the other hand, there was no need for Xiao Chen to keep the clans who did not take the Sword Sect's orders to heart or refused to carry them out. Xiao Chen sat boldly on the main seat in the Sword Sect's hall. He looked at Song Xing, Yang Song, and the other experts of the Sword Sect indifferently. The Green Bamboo Sect is quite interesting. The Green Bamboo Sect was definitely a classic example this time. With the order from the Sword Sect this time, the various clans would either wholeheartedly carry out the Sword Sect's orders, or at the very least, they would put on an act so that they could report back to the Sword Sect in the future. Only the Green Bamboo Sect did not even bother to do any surface work. It was as if they did not take the Sword Sect's orders to heart at all. This was already openly disobeying the Sword Sect's orders. Xiao Chen's killing intent naturally rose in his heart towards the arrogant attitude of the Green Bamboo Sect. When he heard Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing also spoke. Sect Master, the Green Bamboo Sect has actually been disobeying the Sword Sect's orders since before. However, the internal matters of the Sword Sect had not been resolved, so we did not have the time to pay attention to them. Song Xing knew about the Green Bamboo Sect. However, because the Sword Sect had no leader and Song Xing had to guard against Ying, everyone had their own camp. Therefore, they did not pay attention to the small Green Bamboo Sect. Song Xing even guessed that the Green Bamboo Sect had already secretly sided with the Blood Blade Valley. After all, the Green Bamboo Sect was located between the Sword Sects and the Blood Blade Valley's territories. They should have a lot of contact with the Blood Blade Valley. The small Green Bamboo Sect was naturally not worth mentioning to the Sword Sect. They had not paid attention to it previously because of the internal matters of the Sword Sect. However, now that Xiao Chen had succeeded the position of Sect Master of the Sword Sect, the internal matters of the Sword Sect were basically settled apart from He Ying's escape. Although there were still some hidden dangers, it was no longer a big deal. Therefore, after hearing Song Xing's words, Xiao Chen smiled coldly. Since that's the case, let's take down this piece of rat *T in one fell swoop. Otherwise, it will spoil the entire pot of soup. The Green Bamboo Sect had openly disobeyed the Sword Sect's orders, so they naturally had to be destroyed. For the Sword Sect, destroying the Green Bamboo Sect was a piece of cake. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhao Yu stood up and bowed to Xiao Chen. Sect Master, this subordinate is willing to go personally. Zhao Yu volunteered to destroy the Green Bamboo Sect. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled faintly and said, Senior Zhao Yu, there is no need for you to personally deal with a mere Green Bamboo Sect. Isn't this too much of a favor for them? Just let the elders do it. Xiao Chen's words were not exaggerated at all. As one of the Sword Sect's 5 great sword leaders, no, it should be the 4 great sword leaders now because Yuan Lin was already dead, Zhao Yu did not need to personally deal with a mere Green Bamboo Sect. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhao Yu respectfully nodded. Then, on the same day, the Sword Sect was led by 3 elders and hundreds of disciples and attendants. They majestically charged towards the Green Bamboo Sect. Xiao Chen did not care too much about the Green Bamboo Sect. What Xiao Chen truly cared about was the people behind the Green Bamboo Sect, or rather, the Blood Blade Valley. Song Xing guessed that the Green Bamboo Sect had already sided with the Blood Blade Valley, but Xiao Chen was certain that the Green Bamboo Sect had definitely and secretly sided with the Blood Blade Valley. Otherwise, how could the Green Bamboo Sect dare to openly disregard the Sword Sect's orders without the Blood Blade Valley's support? The Green Bamboo Sect's confidence clearly came from the Blood Blade Valley. As a result, after the experts of the Sword Sect set off, Shao Chen led Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui to the Green Bamboo sect in secret. This time, Shao Chen did not bring Long Qing, Xian Yuanling, and the Wine Taoist because the three of them had already entered closed-door cultivation. After Shao Chen gained control of the Sword Sect, he naturally discovered quite a few good things in the Sword Sect's treasury. Without any hesitation, Shao Chen directly let the three of them enter closed-door cultivation. The cultivation resources in the Sword Sect's treasury were completely free for the three of them to use as they wished. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 1936. Long Qing and the others had all chosen to enter into closed-door cultivation. Actually, they knew that their cultivations were too low with Shao Chen's current status. After all, this wasn't the Eight Desolates world. Moreover, Shao Chen was the sect master of the Sword Sect. Thus, Long Qing and the others were unable to help Shao Chen with their current cultivations. Thus, instead of following Shao Chen for no reason, it was better for them to raise their cultivations as soon as possible. On the other hand, Shao Chen naturally didn't hold back at all for Long Qing and the others. The cultivation resources in the Sword Sect's treasury were completely at their disposal. Shao Chen wasn't worried that they would neglect their foundations in their haste to break through with such a huge amount of cultivation resources. After all, even though they could improve very quickly in a short period of time, he believed that Long Qing and the others would absolutely not do that. That was because they knew very well that such improvements were only temporary. If they really disregarded their foundations and forcefully broke through, it would probably be too late for regrets in the future. Shao Chen didn't intend to interfere too much with their cultivation. With Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui, Shao Chen's group of 4 secretly hurried to the Azure Bamboo sect. Song Xing and the others were very puzzled by Shao Chen's personal visit to the Azure Bamboo sect in the beginning. However, the three of them quickly reacted when Shao Chen spoke of his intentions. Shao Chen was certain that the Azure Bamboo sect had definitely secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. In that way, the experts of the Bloodblade Valley would definitely appear when the Sword Sect attacked the Azure Bamboo sect. Shao Chen was going to meet the Bloodblade Valley. Since he was the sect master of the Sword Sect, Shao Chen naturally wouldn't allow another first-rate organization to exist in the province that could rival the Sword Sect. After all, ever since the Sword Sect had been established, the province had always been under the control of the Sword Sect. It was only in the past few years that the Bloodblade Valley had taken advantage of the decline of the Sword Sect and vaguely showed signs of being on par with the Sword Sect. This was something that Shao Chen wouldn't allow. Even if he couldn't destroy the Bloodblade Valley, he would at least drive it out of the province. There could only be one overlord in the province, and that was the Sword Sect. It could be said that after hearing about Song Xing's plan, Shao Chen had perfected it. According to Song Xing, apart from capturing He Ying and stabilizing the internal situation, the plan this time was to eliminate a group of subordinate forces that had already become disloyal. However, Shao Chen's goal clearly wasn't limited to this. In truth, from the moment the sword order was issued, Shao Chen's goal wasn't limited to eliminating the subordinate forces that had already become disloyal. Shao Chen's true goal was actually the Bloodblade Valley. He wanted to use this opportunity to drive the Bloodblade Valley out of the province in one fell swoop, or directly destroy it. For this reason, Shao Chen had specially discussed it with Nangong Guan and the others. Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan had already left the Sword Sect and told the outside world that they had returned to their respective sections. However, the truth was only known to Shao Chen and them. The only one who remained in the Sword Sect was Shao Chen's 4th senior sister, Xiao Xiao. Song Xing wasn't stupid when he heard that Shao Chen wanted to meet the experts of the Bloodblade Valley. He quickly guessed Shao Chen's intentions. For a moment, Song Xing's attitude towards Shao Chen changed slightly. If Song Xing had previously submitted to Shao Chen purely because of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign, then now, at least there was a trace of Shao Chen's ability that Song Xing couldn't help but admire. This was because even Song Xing had never thought of making a move against the Bloodblade Valley at this time. This wasn't to say that the Sword Sect wasn't a match for the Bloodblade Valley, but because the Sword Sect's internal structure hadn't completely stabilized yet. If they made a move against the Bloodblade Valley now, it wouldn't be safe. Song Xing wanted stability, but Shao Chen wasn't like that. Since he had used the opportunity of capturing He Ying to divert attention, why not do it more straightforwardly? Furthermore, Shao Chen had absolute confidence in destroying the Bloodblade Valley. After all, the Sword Sect, Family Nangong, and Sky Ju Sect were three first-rate factions. How could they not deal with a mere Bloodblade Valley if they joined forces? Most importantly, if Shao Chen could use this opportunity to take down the Bloodblade Valley in one fell swoop, Shao Chen's prestige in the Sword Sect would definitely increase greatly. This was also what Shao Chen valued the most. It could be said that making a move against the Bloodblade Valley wasn't a rash move on Shao Chen's part, nor was it a desire for grandiose success. It was a decision he had made after careful consideration and absolute confidence. The four of them secretly hurried towards the Green Bamboo Sect. At the same time, within the Great Hall of the Green Bamboo Sect, the sect leader of the Green Bamboo Sect stood respectfully in the middle of the Great Hall. In front of him, on the seat that originally belonged to him, sat a white-haired, skinny, and slightly hunchbacked old man. He appeared like an old man with one foot in the grave. However, in front of this old man, the Green Bamboo Sect's head did not dare to be disrespectful in the slightest. He lowered his head and respectfully said those words. Vice Sect Master, I've already received news that the people from the Sword Sect are on their way to the Azure Bamboo Sect. Who's leading them? The four sword heads or the Song Xing? The old man asked with a hoarse voice. The Azure Bamboo Sect Master still replied respectfully to the old man's question. Neither. It's just that the three elders are leading them. 3 elders? Haha, it seems like the little kid sect master of the Sword Sect didn't notice at all. The old man laughed. Since the Sword Sect only sent 3 elders to lead them, it was obvious that the upper echelons of the Sword Sect didn't guess that the Azure Bamboo Sect had secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. Otherwise, how could Gao Qing of the Sword Sect only send 3 elders to lead them? One had to know that 3 elders were enough to destroy the Azure Bamboo Sect, but it wasn't enough to go against the Bloodblade Valley. One had to know that the Valley Master of the Bloodblade Valley had the same End Realm cultivation as Song Xing, and the 2 Vice Valley Masters of the Bloodblade Valley had the same Dao Realm cultivation as Yang Song and the other 3 sword heads. Therefore, it was impossible for the 3 elders to deal with the Bloodblade Valley. Furthermore, the Bloodblade Valley had won a few experts to join them, and their strength had increased by 30%. Hearing the old man's words, the Azure Bamboo Sect Master nodded respectfully. Seeing this, the old man waved his hand and said, "All right, you can leave. Retreat according to the plan. I'll stay behind to guard." The old man's name was Ku Rong, and he was one of the 2 Vice Valley Masters of the Bloodblade Valley. His cultivation had also reached the Dao realm, and he was extremely strong. This time, he had specially rushed from the Bloodblade Valley to the Azure Bamboo Sect to help them retreat. Hearing Ku Rong's words, the Azure Bamboo Sect Master naturally left the hall respectfully. Following which, Ku Rong's hoarse voice sounded out in the hall, as if he was talking to himself. "Little Kid Sect Master of the Sword Sect, let me give you a greeting gift this time. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1937. The reason why the Green Bamboo Sect dared to openly defy the Sword Sect's orders was indeed because they had the backing of the Bloody Blade Valley. Moreover, after this incident, the Green Bamboo sect had already decided to publicly submit to the Bloody Blade Valley. After all, they definitely could not stay in the Sword sect any longer. The Green Bamboo sect master went down to prepare for the evacuation. However, the Sword sect's speed was clearly much faster than the Green Bamboo sect and Ku Rong had expected. The Sword sect had sent a large number of experts to the Green Bamboo sect. Naturally, this matter could not be hidden from the other forces. At this moment, Wu Shuang's eyes were fixed on the Green Bamboo sect. They all wanted to see how the Sword sect would deal with the Green Bamboo sect this time. Just as the Green Bamboo sect was about to evacuate, 3 elders from the Sword sect led hundreds of Sword sect disciples and deacons to the Green Bamboo sect after just one day. Hundreds of spatial cracks appeared above the Green Bamboo sect. The 3 elders stood at the front and looked down at the Green Bamboo sect below. One of them shouted coldly, "Don't you think it's a little too late to leave now?" Before the Green Bamboo sect could evacuate, the people from the Sword sect had already arrived. Upon hearing this, the Green Bamboo sect's elder also led a group of experts from the Green Bamboo sect into the sky and arrived before the 3 elders. In fact, the Green Bamboo sect's strength was not strong. Even the elders of the Green Bamboo sect were only in the comprehension state. They were not even as strong as the 3 elders from the Sword sect. However, because Ku Rong was present, the Green Bamboo sect master did not show any signs of nervousness in front of the 3 elders from the Sword sect. Instead, he sneered. "Elder, what do you mean by this? Why should the Green Bamboo sect leave?" The Green Bamboo sect master did not show any respect to the 3 elders from the Sword sect. Upon seeing this, a cold glint flashed across the eyes of the elder who had spoken earlier. However, before he could speak, an aura of Tao realm perfection shot up into the sky from the Green Bamboo sect's main hall. Then, Ku Rong's figure instantly appeared beside the Green Bamboo sect master. The 3 elders of the Sword sect were naturally familiar with Ku Rong. After all, the Bloody Blade Valley and the Sword sect had not fought much in the past few years. As the deputy valley master of the Bloody Blade Valley, Ku Rong was naturally one of the people that the Sword sect paid close attention to. They did not expect that Ku Rong would actually be here, and they were slightly stunned. However, the 3 Sword Gate elders quickly regained their senses, and an extremely cold, killing intent flashed across their eyes as they coldly stared at Ku Rong and the Green Bamboo sect leader. Your Green Bamboo sect has indeed sided with the Blood Blade Valley. Ku Rong's appearance here was enough to prove that the Green Bamboo sect had sided with the Blood Blade Valley. Ku Rong laughed coldly when he heard this. His laughter was very hoarse. "Haha, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Your Sword sect is already at the end of its life. Anyone with a discerning eye will naturally know what to choose." Humph. The 3 Sword sect elders coldly snorted when they heard this. The 3 elders' cultivations were all at the comprehension realm. As for Ku Rong, as the valley master of the Bloody Blade Valley, his cultivation had already reached the great perfection realm. His battle prowess was comparable to the 4 great sword leaders of the Sword sect. It was precisely because of his absolute strength that Ku Rong dared to be so unscrupulous. This was because he alone was enough to kill the people of the Sword sect before him. A terrifying killing intent suddenly erupted from Ku Rong's turbid eyes. He looked at the people of the Sword sect and said coldly, "Today, I will kill you all today. It just so happens that I'll kill all of you today. In the future, my Blood Blade Valley will personally attack the Sword Gate." Everyone in the Sword Province knew that the Bloody Blade Valley wanted to destroy the Sword sect. When they heard this, the 3 elders were furious. However, at the same time, they were thinking of a countermeasure. They had no choice. Ku Rong's strength was not something they could deal with. If they fought head-on, they probably would not be able to gain any advantage. Moreover, after Ku Rong appeared, the other experts of the Bloody Blade Valley also appeared. Although there were not many of them, their strength could not be underestimated. With the support of the Bloody Blade Valley and Ku Rong's presence, the green bamboo sect was indeed very confident. Facing the experts of the sword sect, the people of the green bamboo sect were not nervous at all. However, just as Ku Rong finished speaking and the people of the sword sect were secretly nervous, an indifferent voice suddenly rang out. "I'm afraid you won't have the chance." Along with the voice, Xiao Chen, Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui slowly appeared in the sky. When they saw Xiao Chen and the other three appear, the people of the sword sect were all delighted. However, the faces of Ku Rong and the others, as well as those of the green bamboo sect, sank. Xiao Chen and the others had secretly rushed to the green bamboo sect. Even the three elders of the sword sect did not know their whereabouts, so it was even more impossible for Ku Rong and the others to know. At this moment, when the four of them suddenly appeared here, especially when they looked at Song Xing, a solemn expression flashed across Ku Rong's eyes. Song Xing was an End Realm expert and was on the same level as the Valley Master of the Bloody Blade Valley. Now that Song Xing appeared here, Ku Rong was indeed nervous. His eyes flashed. At the same time, the people of the sword sect respectfully bowed to Xiao Chen and said, "Greetings, sect master." Xiao Chen nodded slightly, but his gaze remained on Ku Rong from start to finish. Before this, Song Xing had already told Xiao Chen about Ku Rong's identity, so he knew that Ku Rong was one of the two Vice Valley Masters of the Bloody Blade Valley. Their eyes met, and Xiao Chen coldly smiled as he looked at Ku Rong. "Your Bloody Blade Valley really thinks highly of a small green bamboo sect, to actually let a Vice Valley Master like you come personally. You are the new sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen?" Ku Rong said coldly when he heard Xiao Chen's words. Ku Rong had naturally heard of Xiao Chen before, and he had a better understanding of him because He Ying was currently in the Bloody Blade Valley. After escaping from the sword sect, He Ying came to the Bloody Blade Valley. With his current cultivation, the Bloody Blade Valley naturally treated him with respect and gave him a high status. Ku Rong also learned a lot about Xiao Chen from He Ying. Upon hearing Ku Rong's words, Xiao Chen smiled nonchalantly. He did not intend to answer the question, either. He simply said, however, coming to the green bamboo sect this time was not a wise choice, because I'm afraid you won't be able to return. As he spoke, the killing intent in Xiao Chen's eyes shot out without any concealment. When he heard this, a cold glint flashed in Ku Rong's eyes. He indeed did not expect that Xiao Chen would actually come personally, and even bring along Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui. If he had known earlier, he would definitely not have continued to stay in the green bamboo sect. After all, with his cultivation, he was simply no match for Song Xing. Moreover, there was also Zhao Yu and Li Sui, whose strength was not any weaker than his. A cold glint flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes, but he did not give Ku Rong any chance. He glanced at Song Xing. When he saw this, Song Xing immediately shouted coldly, "Kill!" Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1938. I'll remember it in a second. Wonderful, no pop-up window free read. Song Xing shouted coldly and immediately attacked Ku Rong. At the same time, the other experts from the sword sect, including Zhao Yu and Li Sui, also charged into the green bamboo sect. This time, Xiao Chen did not show any mercy to the green bamboo sect. Therefore, he naturally killed everyone in the green bamboo sect without mercy. The sword sect's deterrence to the other subordinate forces was getting weaker and weaker. This time, the green bamboo sect had openly disobeyed the sword sect's orders. It was a good opportunity to make an example out of them. Ku Rong was fiercely held back by Song Xing naturally. The people from the green bamboo sect could not stop the attacks from the sword sect. For a time, the green bamboo sect was filled with wails as the experts from the green bamboo sect were killed one after another. Compared to the sword sect, the green bamboo sect's strength was indeed too weak. Both sides were not on the same level at all. Therefore, the destruction of the Green Bamboo sect was nothing to the Sword sect. Xiao Chen did not make a move because there was no need for him to. Standing in the sky and watching the experts from the Green Bamboo sect being killed one after another, Xiao Chen's eyes showed no mercy at all. The battle did not last long. The Green Bamboo sect's resistance was completely useless against the people from the Sword sect. Soon, only Ku Rong's side was still bitterly holding on in the end. However, Ku Rong was obviously not a match for Cangxing. Ku Rong, who was only at the Dao realm, could not possibly be a match for Cangxing. Ku Rong's injuries were getting worse as he bitterly held on. Looking at Cangxing, Ku Rong shouted coldly, "Cangxing, you can't kill me. Do you want the Bloody Blade Valley to go to war with the Sword sect?" Ku Rong had completely miscalculated this time. He did not expect that Xiao Chen would actually personally lead Cangxing and the other two to the Green Bamboo sect. If he had known this, Ku Rong would not have cared about the Green Bamboo sect and would have left long ago. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Hearing Ku Rong's words, Cangxing replied coldly, "Let's go to war then. Do you think I'll be afraid of the Bloody Blade Valley?" The Blood Saber Valley's development in the past few years was indeed pretty good. However, compared to the Sword Gate, the Blood Saber Valley's foundation was indeed much weaker. Previously, it was also because of the Sword Gate that the Blood Saber Valley had been able to seize the opportunity and quickly rise up. However, now that the internal problems of the Sword sect had been resolved and Xiao Chen had successfully secured the position of sect master, the Sword sect naturally did not fear the Bloody Blade Valley. Furthermore, according to Xiao Chen, even if the Bloody Blade Valley did not attack the Sword sect this time, the Sword sect would probably attack the Bloody Blade Valley. As the only overlord of the Sword sect, how could the Sword sect tolerate the existence of the Bloody Blade Valley? How could they allow others to sleep beside them? Therefore, Ku Rong's threat was completely useless against Cangxing. Cangxing's attacks became even fiercer as soon as he said that. It was as if he would not stop until he killed Ku Rong. Ku Rong could be said to be miserable in the face of Cangxing's fierce attacks. Although he was trying his best to persevere, the difference in strength made Ku Rong feel increasingly powerless. He definitely could not defeat Cangxing, but even if he wanted to run, Ku Rong had no chance at all. Unless Ku Rong had a spatial compass, he definitely had no chance. However, a spatial compass was really precious. Even the Sword sect did not have many of them, let alone the Bloody Blade Valley. Therefore, Ku Rong did not have a spatial compass with him. Without a spatial compass, it was almost impossible for Ku Rong to escape from Cangxing. The two of them fought fiercely for several hours. In the end, Ku Rong was unwillingly killed by Cangxing. With Ku Rong's death, the Green Bamboo sect was completely destroyed. At that moment, Cangxing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui stood respectfully in front of Xiao Chen in the main hall of the Green Bamboo sect. Xiao Chen sat boldly on the seat of the Green Bamboo sect's sect master. Xiao Chen smiled faintly as he looked at the three of them. "You can have Qian Ling bring his men over." The entire Green Bamboo sect had been massacred by the Sword sect. Now that Xiao Chen had asked Qian Ling to bring his men to the Green Bamboo sect, his intention was very clear. He wanted to start a war with the Bloody Blade Valley. The Bloody Blade Valley would naturally not let the matter rest after killing one of the two vice valley masters of the Bloody Blade Valley. Xiao Chen had no intention of backing down either. The Green Bamboo sect was clearly the best place to start a war with the Bloody Blade Valley because it was close to the Bloody Blade Valley. If the Bloody Blade Valley launched a large-scale attack, they would have to pass through the Green Bamboo sect. As a result, Xiao Chen had moved all the experts of the Sword sect to the Green Bamboo sect to await the Bloody Blade Valley's arrival. Cangxing and the other two immediately nodded respectfully as they understood Xiao Chen's intentions. They did not leave the Green Bamboo sect. On the contrary, Xiao Chen's group stayed in the Green Bamboo sect and waited for the Bloody Blade Valley's response. At the same time, on the second day after the Green Bamboo Sect's destruction, all the subordinate forces of the Sword Sect were extremely shocked. When they heard the news of the Green Bamboo Sect's destruction, all of them had different thoughts. They could not help but become nervous. It could not be helped. This time, the Sword Sect's methods were too forceful. Many forces had heard about the Green Bamboo Sect's disobedience to the Sword Sect's orders. However, no one had expected the Sword Sect to destroy the Green Bamboo Sect so straightforwardly. Moreover, it was said that they did not leave a single person alive. From the Green Bamboo Sect's sect master to the Green Bamboo Sect's disciples, not a single person survived or escaped. They were all killed. Xiao Chen's goal of destroying the Green Bamboo Sect was to kill one as a warning to the others. Now, it seemed that he had achieved his goal. Along with the destruction of the Green Bamboo Sect, the affiliated sects that were once disloyal to the Sword's Gate, or rather, wavering, were now extremely nervous. This was because they did not know whether the Sword Sect would act against them in the next moment. After the incident with the Green Bamboo Sect, many forces had already understood that the new sect master of the Sword Sect was definitely a decisive person. He had used slaughter to fiercely intimidate the major forces under the Sword Sect. He had also clearly told everyone that although the Sword Sect was weak, it was still not something they could contend against. The Sword Sect could easily destroy a force like them. Look at the Green Bamboo Sect. It could be said that they did not have the slightest ability to fight back. They were uprooted by the Sword Sect in the blink of an eye. Xiao Chun had used the simplest and most brutal method to tell the subordinate forces that as a subordinate force of the Sword Sect in the Jian province, it was best not to be disloyal. Moreover, they should not be like the Green Bamboo Sect. Otherwise, there would only be one outcome, and that was destruction. With the destruction of the Green Bamboo Sect, all the subordinate forces of the Sword Sect strictly followed the orders of the Sword Sect and began to search for He Ying's whereabouts with all their might. They did not dare to be perfunctory or careless. At the same time, the various subordinate forces sent people to the Sword Sect and offered many treasures. Their goal was to curry favor with the Sword Sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1939. Xiao Qin, Song Xing, and the other higher-ups of the Sword Sect saw the changes in the subordinate forces. Of course, this was what everyone wanted to see. This time, the Sword's Gate's thunderous strike and annihilation of the Green Bamboo Sect had indeed served as a great deterrent to the other subsidiary forces. For the time being, these people were deterred. Next, Xiao Qin and the Sword Sect would have to face the Bloody Blade Valley's counterattack. However, Xiao Qin did not care much about this. Although Xiao Qin's cultivation was only at the Celestial Emperor realm, Xiao Qin had a strong background. As Jun Wuya's last disciple, this identity alone was enough to deter the Bloody Blade Valley from making any moves. In addition, Xiao Qin had 4 senior brothers and senior sisters. It should not be too difficult to destroy the Bloody Blade Valley. Of course, the Bloody Blade Valley was not stupid. Therefore, after learning that the Green Bamboo Sect had been destroyed and that Ku Rong had been killed, the Bloody Blade Valley did not make any moves even after 3 days had passed. Xiao Qin remained in the Green Bamboo Sect for the time being. While waiting for the Bloody Blade Valley's response, he did not slack off on his cultivation. Although Xiao Qin's current status was no longer what it used to be, and as the clan master of the Sword Gate, it could be said that he was considered a tyrant in the Great Thousand World. However, Xiao Qin knew very well that compared to his status, his strength was still too weak, especially when compared to the clan master of the Sword Gate. While dealing with the Sword Sect's matters, Xiao Qin also had to raise his cultivation as soon as possible. Only when he had the strength to stand proudly in the Great Thousand World could he lead the Sword Sect to greater heights. Although Nangong Guan and the others would spare no effort to help him, they could only help him for a while, but they could not help him forever. One had to be strong enough to forge iron. Xiao Chun cultivated diligently. At the same time, he instructed Song Xing and the others to closely monitor the movements of the Bloodblade Valley. While Xiao Chun was waiting for the Bloodblade Valley's response, on the other side, in the main hall of the Bloodblade Valley, 3 days had passed. The Bloodblade Valley had not reacted to the sword sect's actions at all. On this day, He Ying and a middle-aged man were sitting across from each other in the main hall of the Bloodblade Valley. Back then, when he escaped from the sword sect, He Ying had directly come to the Bloodblade Valley. Furthermore, he had already joined the Bloodblade Valley. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, He Ying said with a cold expression, "Now is not the time to act against the sword sect." The middle-aged man sitting opposite He Ying was the valley head of Bloodblade Valley. Like He Ying, he was an end-realm expert called Lin Gang. Hearing He Ying's words, Lin Gang's expression did not change much. He just said calmly, "Now is not the time to act against the sword sect, but whether or not the sword sect's little sect leader will act against us." When he was in withered glory, He Ying had always advocated not to start a war with the sword sect because the time was not right. He Ying knew that Xiao Chun was Jun Wuya's disciple. Furthermore, when he escaped from the sword sect, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan were all present and had even acted. If they were to act against the sword sect now, it would mean that the Bloodblade Valley would have to face the sword sect, family Nangong, and Tianjua sect at the same time. With the Bloodblade Valley's strength, they obviously had no chance of winning against these 3 top powers. Thus, He Ying did not agree to start a war with the sword sect at this time. Lin Gang knew the logic behind He Ying's opinion. To be able to develop the Bloodblade Valley to such a stage and be able to stand up against the sword sect, Lin Gang was naturally not an ordinary person. He knew the consequences of starting a war with the sword sect now. However, just as he said, the problem now was not whether or not the Bloodblade Valley should start a war with the sword sect, but whether or not the sword sect was willing to let the Bloodblade Valley go. With family Nangong, Tianjua sect, and Wu Huan, the sword sect definitely had the ability to destroy the Bloodblade Valley. Based on the relationship between the Bloodblade Valley and the sword sect in the past, how could the sword sect give up on such a great opportunity? Furthermore, a mountain could not hold 2 tigers. Within the sword sect, having 2 top powers at the same time was not something the sword sect was willing to see. Thus, no matter how one looked at it, the sword sect had no reason to let the Bloodblade Valley go. Hearing Lin Gang's words, He Ying's expression turned ugly. After a moment of silence, he said, "Valley Master, actually, we should leave." "Leave? Where to?" Hearing this, Lin Gang asked. "Leave the sword sect. Right now, we can only avoid them. Rather than staying behind to fight to the death with the sword sect and being destroyed in the end, why not temporarily avoid them and wait for the right time to change?" He Ying said. He Ying was indeed a scheming person. Seeing that the situation was not good, he straightforwardly told Lin Gang to leave. At this point, He Ying paused. Without waiting for Lin Gang to speak, He Yong continued, "Right now, the resources below have basically been gathered. Taking these cultivation resources, our Bloodblade Valley can find a new place and wait for the right time to develop at the same time." When the Green Bamboo sect had been destroyed, He Ying had already ordered Lin Gang to wantonly gather all the cultivation resources within the Bloodblade Valley's sphere of influence for the sake of evacuating. In 3 days, the gathering was basically complete. Hearing He Ying's words, Lin Gang fell into deep thought. However, his face quickly lit up as he said, "All right, we will do as brother he says. For the time being, we will give way to the sword sect's little sect master. We will leave for now. However, there will be a day when I, Lin Gang, will definitely return." Lin Gang chose to accept He Ying's suggestion because he had no other choice. After operating in the sword sect for so many years, How could Lin Gang not know the price of evacuating? However, as He Ying had said, the Blood Blade Valley did not have the slightest chance of winning against the Sword Sect. Knowing that death was the only outcome, if they insisted on fighting, they would only be digging their own graves. Therefore, evacuating the Sword Sect seemed to be Lin Gang's only choice. Upon hearing Lin Gang's words, He Ying faintly nodded. That day, the Blood Blade Valley began to evacuate. Starships carrying the numerous disciples, attendants and elders of the Blood Blade Valley rose into the air and flew out of the Sword Sect. At the same time, the original mountain gate of the Blood Blade Valley was personally destroyed by Lin Gang before they left. At the same time, various cultivation resources and natural treasures were also taken away. Since they were going to evacuate, Lin Gang naturally would not leave anything behind for the Sword Sect. The sudden evacuation of the Blood Blade Valley was incomparably sudden for the various large subordinate factions. Many people were not even prepared for the Blood Blade Valley to leave the Sword Sect. Following the departure of the Blood Blade Valley, everyone understood what this meant. It meant that the Blood Blade Valley was afraid of starting a war with the Sword Sect. At the same time, it also meant that the Sword Sect was about to return to the era of the Sword Sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1940. The Bloody Blade Valley's retreat was like a bolt from the blue to the many subordinate factions that had always relied on them. This was because many of these factions had defected from the Sword Sect to the Bloody Blade Valley. Now, the Bloody Blade Valley had fled, but they were unwilling to leave. It was not hard to imagine what would happen to them next. Many people were in a state of panic. They did not know how the Sword Sect would treat them or deal with them. At almost the same time, Song Xing, who had been paying attention to the Bloody Blade Valley, also received news of the Bloody Blade Valley's retreat. He immediately reported the matter to Xiao Chen. Song Xing hurriedly rushed to Xiao Chen's courtyard and reported the matter of the Bloody Blade Valley to Xiao Chen. Originally, Song Xing wanted to immediately pursue, but who would have thought that Xiao Chen would smile faintly when he heard the news? There's no need. Xiao Chen did not seem to care about the Bloody Blade Valley's sudden retreat at all. Song Xing asked in confusion, "Why? Aren't we letting the Bloody Blade Valley escape?" Song Xing was too anxious, so he momentarily forgot his attitude. Only when he heard his words and Xiao Chen looked over did Song Xing notice. He immediately bowed respectfully. "Sect Master, please forgive me. This subordinate was rude earlier." Xiao Chen was the sect master of the Sword Sect, while Song Xing was a subordinate. He should not have questioned Xiao Chen like this. However, Xiao Chen clearly did not intend to make a fuss about it. He smiled faintly and said, "Senior, there's no need for this. There are no outsiders here." Xiao Chen had always respected Song Xing. Thus, when the two of them were together, Xiao Chen had never asked Song Xing to do anything. It was fine as long as he acted casually. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing slowly stood up. Then, Xiao Chen said calmly, "Our goal was to drive the Blood Blade Valley out of the Jian province. Now that they have left, isn't it better?" Not only was Xiao Chen not displeased with the Bloody Blade Valley's decision to withdraw from the Jian province, he was even secretly delighted. Why? Because the Bloody Blade Valley had taken the initiative to withdraw. In other words, they had achieved Xiao Chen's goal without sacrificing a single soldier. Just think about it. If the Bloodblade Valley took the initiative to withdraw, then wouldn't the Jian province belong to the Sword Sect from now on? Had Xiao Chen achieved his goal? Therefore, the evacuation of the Bloody Blade Valley wasn't bad news for Xiao Chen. Song Xing understood Xiao Chen's meaning, but he was still a little worried. But the Bloody Blade Valley will always be a threat if we don't get rid of them. The Bloody Blade Valley was indeed a threat to the Sword Sect. Moreover, The Bloody Blade Valley had taken the initiative to withdraw this time, most likely to preserve their strength and wait for an opportunity to act in the future. Xiao Qin nodded slightly when he heard this, but he still said calmly, "Senior, the Bloody Blade Valley is indeed a threat, but the most important thing is the strength of our sword sect. In the future, when our sword sect is strong enough, why should we fear the Bloody Blade Valley? When the time comes, destroying the Bloody Blade Valley will be as easy as flipping our hand." Compared to the Bloody Blade Valley, the strength of the sword sect was what Xiao Qin valued the most. Now, Xiao Qin had a way to quickly strengthen the sword sect and had already discussed it with his 3 senior brothers, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan. Song Xing nodded after Xiao Qin finished speaking. Then, Xiao Qin didn't linger on this issue. He looked at Song Xing and said, "Senior, I'm afraid you'll have to work hard for the next few days. Since the Bloody Blade Valley has retreated, you'll naturally have to take control of their territory as soon as possible. As for the large factions that used to rely on the Bloody Blade Valley, you'll have to give them a beating. In addition, I plan to have the sect masters of the various subordinate factions gather in the sword sect in a month. Therefore, Senior must think of a way to completely take control of everything left behind by the Bloody Blade Valley, including the subordinate factions. When the time comes, have their sect masters come with you to the sword sect." Song Xing didn't hesitate at all when he heard Xiao Qin's words. He immediately nodded and replied, "Yes." Song Xing didn't have any objections to Xiao Qin's order and straightforwardly nodded in agreement. The next day, Xiao Qin returned to the sword sect under the protection of Qian Ling and over 100 disciples of the sword sect. As for Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui, the 3 of them, as well as the other experts of the sword sect, they stayed behind and directly returned to the territory of the Bloody Blade Valley. They began to subdue the subordinate factions of the Bloody Blade Valley. The Bloody Blade Valley had once been able to stand up to the sword sect, so they controlled close to half of the Jian province. Now that the Bloody Blade Valley had voluntarily retreated, the territory that once belonged to the Bloody Blade Valley naturally fell into the hands of the sword sect. As Song Xing and the others entered, the subordinate factions that used to belong to the Bloody Blade Valley all became extremely nervous. There was nothing they could do. Even the Bloody Blade Valley had fled. They didn't believe that they had the strength to contend against the sword sect. They were nervous and apprehensive. As a result, wherever Song Xing and the others went, the local clans or sects would personally come forward to greet them. Moreover, they were all willing to pledge their loyalty to the sword sect. These people were afraid that the sword sect would directly wipe them out, so they were extremely respectful. However, Song Xing naturally wouldn't foolishly believe them. He still had to warn them. With Song Xing overseeing the situation, Xiao Qin wasn't worried about what would happen after the Bloody Blade Valley retreated. 20 days passed in the blink of an eye. The former territory of the Bloody Blade Valley had already been taken over by the sword sect. The entire Jian province had returned to the situation where the sword sect was the only major faction in the past. There were still 10 days until the 1-month period that Xiao Qin had mentioned. The sword sect had already sent out invitations to the various subordinate factions to gather at the sword sect. Naturally, none of the subordinate factions dared to reject the gathering held by the sword sect this time. This time, the sword sect had suddenly moved. Not only did they destroy the Green Bamboo sect, but they even forced the Bloody Blade sect to leave. The sudden change made the subordinate factions understand a principle. No matter how weak the sword sect was, even if they had fallen out of the top 10 Lingtian sects, the sword sect still ruled the entire Jian province. Under Xiao Qin's leadership, the sword sect had truly revealed their fangs this time. With lightning speed, they displayed their absolute strength to the various factions in the Jian province. Unlike their usual attitude, the sword sect's unyielding attitude this time made those who were dishonest no longer dare to have any improper thoughts. After leaving the matters to Tsang Xing, Yang Song, and the others, Xiao Chun immersed himself in cultivation every day. At the same time, with the help of the various cultivation resources provided by the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen's cultivation base had also broken through to the initial stage of the Celestial Emperor stage. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1941. Xiao Qin left almost all the matters of the Sword Sect to Tsang Xing and Yang Song. However, there was one thing that Xiao Qin needed to do personally. This matter could allow the Sword Sect's strength to increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. In order to make the Sword Sect stronger, Xiao Qin used all the resources around him. According to Xiao Qin's idea, he wanted Zhou Song and Wu Huan to join the Sword Sect. Zhou Song founded the Tianju sect. However, the Tianju sect's foundation wasn't strong enough. Therefore, even though it had reached the level of a first-rate force, it was still one of the weakest first-rate forces. In the Tianju sect, other than Zhou Song, the only ones who could be considered worthy were the two Dao Realm Vice Sect Masters. Moreover, Zhou Song didn't have any children. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for him to lead the Tianju sect to join the Sword Sect. As for Wu Huan, it was even more so. As a rogue cultivator, Wu Huan didn't have the slightest concern. If he wanted Zhou Song and Wu Huan to join the Sword Sect, the overall strength of the Sword Sect could indeed increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. Of course, this required the consent of the two. As for Nangong Guan and Xiao Xiao, Xiao Qin didn't want them to join the Sword Sect. Xiao Xiao was the holy maiden of the Moon Palace. It was impossible for her to join the Sword Sect. As for Nangong Guan, she was the head of the family Nangong. The family Nangong and the Tianju sect were completely different. First of all, the family Nangong had a long history. No one knew how many generations of family Nangong had passed through. Therefore, it was impossible for Nangong Guan to give up or lead the family Nangong to join the Sword Sect. Moreover, the family Nangong was different from the Tianju sect. In the family Nangong, although Nangong Guan was the current head of the family, there were many things that she couldn't do alone. In the family Nangong, there were several old monsters. They were all Nangong Guan's elders. Therefore, even if Nangong Guan agreed, those old monsters in the family Nangong wouldn't. The Tianju sect was different. It was originally founded by Zhou Song. So, in the Tianju sect, it could be said that Zhou Song and bounds 5 people. After 3 rounds of drinking, Xiao Chen finally spoke his mind. He looked at Zhou Song and Wu Huan and said, "Second senior brother, third senior brother, what do you think of the matter that I told you before? You and I will definitely be able to bring the Sword Sect back to its former glory." He had already mentioned this matter to Zhou Song and Wu Huan. Now that Xiao Chen asked again, Wu Huan didn't hesitate too much and immediately nodded. "I don't have any problems. I'm just one person. I don't have any attachments." Wu Huan didn't have any attachments. Hearing this, Zhou Song, who was beside him, pondered for a moment. Then, he said, "I'm fine with it too. But junior brother, the Sword Sect has always been the world of sword cultivators. Your third senior brother and I aren't sword cultivators. If we join the Sword Sect, wouldn't it be a little?" Zhou Song didn't reject joining the Sword Sect too much. Besides, Xiao Chen also said that even if they joined the Sword Sect, they would treat the people of the Tianju sect well. For example, Xiao Chen would definitely arrange for the 2 vice sect leaders of the Tianju sect to become the Sword Sect's head of the Sword Sect. The only thing that made Zhou Song hesitate was that the Sword Sect was the world of sword cultivators. Although there were sword cultivators in the Tianju sect, many of them weren't sword cultivators. Would it be a little inappropriate for them to join the Sword Sect? But in this regard, Xiao Chen smiled. "Second senior brother, I've thought about this. The Sword Sect has been declining for a long time now. Its future development will naturally need to change. Xiao Chun had naturally thought about this, but now wasn't the right time. According to Xiao Chun, if the Sword Sect wanted to return to the ranks of the top 10 Lingtian sects, it had to change. He believed that many people were aware of this. Besides, Xiao Chun was now the new sect leader of the Sword Sect. Naturally, he didn't wish to continue on the same path as the Sword Sect. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song pondered for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Zhou Song also nodded in agreement. Regarding this, Xiao Chen was overjoyed. He then toasted with Zhou Song and Wu Huan. With the addition of Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the strength of the Sword Sect would naturally be greatly improved. There was no doubt about this. Looking at Xiao Chen and the other two, Nangong Guan also said with a smile, "Little junior brother, you've been planning this for a long time." Hearing Nangong Guan's words, Xiao Chen smiled. Indeed, he had been planning this for a long time. It should be known that Xiao Chen was an extremely ambitious person. Since he had become the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen naturally didn't want the Sword Sect to continue to be decadent. One day, Xiao Chen would bring the Sword Sect to the ranks of the top 10 Lingtian sects, and even become the #1 sect in the Great Thousand World. Moreover, Xiao Chen wouldn't stick to the rules and follow the old path of the Sword Sect. Xiao Chen was very clear about this, and he already had a rough plan in his heart. In Xiao Chen's hands, the Sword Sect would definitely undergo a qualitative change. At that time, it would definitely become one of the most powerful sects in the Great Thousand World. Xiao Chen smiled faintly and didn't say much. Seeing this, Nangong Guan smiled and said, "Little junior brother, although I can't join your Sword Sect, I can represent family Nangong and form an alliance with the Sword Sect." Nangong Guan could represent family Nangong and form an alliance with the Sword Sect, and Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't refuse. The three of them spared no effort to help Xiao Chen. On the other hand, Xiao Xiao was somewhat powerless in this matter. After all, she wasn't like Nangong Guan and the other two, and she couldn't represent the Moon Palace. However, Xiao Chen didn't mind this. Moreover, speaking of which, there would be many opportunities for the Sword Sect and the Moon Palace to interact in the future. As the Moon Palace's holy maiden, Xiao Zhao's help to him wouldn't be any less than Nangong Guan and the other two. After agreeing on this matter, the senior and junior brothers naturally drank until they were drunk. The next day, Zhou Song personally rushed back to the Tianju sect to arrange for the merger to join the Sword Sect. Of course, this merger was all about resources. If there were people in the Tianju sect who weren't willing, Zhou Song wouldn't force them. However, there shouldn't be anyone who wasn't willing. After all, joining the Sword Sect was obviously better than staying in the Tianju sect. Compared to ordinary first-rate forces, the Sword Sect had a huge advantage, and that was their foundation that was comparable to the 10 great Ling Tian sects. This foundation shouldn't be underestimated. A strong foundation represented a good cultivation environment. The stronger a sect's foundation was, the better the treatment its disciples would receive. This was something that most people understood. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1942. Zhou Song and Wu Huan had both agreed to join the Sword Sect. Zhou Song had already left for the Tianjua sect. The next day, Xiao Chen also informed Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others about this matter. Now that the matters in the Blood Blade Valley were basically settled, Song Xing had also brought his men back to the Sword Sect a few days ago. As for the former territory of the Blood Blade Valley, there shouldn't be any problems with leaving Li Sui to guard it. After hearing from Xiao Chen that Zhou Song and Wu Huan had actually joined the Sword Sect, and that Zhou Song would even lead the Tianjua sect's people to join the Sword Sect, Song Xing and the others were stunned at first, but then they were overjoyed. They were all veterans of the Sword Sect. Song Xing and the others naturally hoped to see the Sword Sect become stronger. After all, Song Xing and the others had experienced the sword sect's most glorious period. Now that the sword sect had fallen to such a state, they naturally felt incomparably aggrieved. And now, Shao Chen was able to make the sword sect's strength soar by leaps and bounds in such a short period of time. Song Xing and the others naturally had no reason to refuse. Song Xing and the others didn't even take Zhou Song's previous worries to heart. Sword cultivator or not, these weren't important to Song Xing and the others at all. As long as the sword sect could become stronger again, these things didn't matter. Without any help at all, the matter of Wu Huan and Zhou Song joining the sword sect was decided just like that. In the sword sect's main hall, as Zhou Song had rushed back to the Tianjua sect, he wasn't present for the time being. On the other hand, Wu Huan and Song Xing were acquainted with each other. Now that Wu Huan had joined the sword sect, everyone was naturally closer to each other. After exchanging some pleasantries, Song Xing bowed deeply to Shao Chen and said, "Subordinate." Song Xing originally wanted to thank Shao Chen because Shao Chen didn't go back on his words. When Shao Chen first became the sect leader of the sword sect, he said that he would lead the sword sect back into the top 10 sect. Now that Zhou Song and Wu Huan had joined the sword sect, Song Xing and the others seemed to see the arrival of this day. Song Xing's was absolutely loyal to the sword sect. No, to be precise, to be exact, Song Xing. However, in the face of Song Xing's gratitude, Shao Chen helped him up and said with a smile, "Senior, what are you doing?" As the sect leader of the sword sect, Shao Chen was obviously happy to see the sword sect become stronger. Therefore, Shao Chen felt ashamed to accept Song Xing's gratitude. The matter was settled smoothly. Next was the arrangement after the Tianjua sect was merged into the sword sect. According to Shao Chen, Zhou Song and Wu Huan would naturally become the vice sect leaders of the sword sect. Their status would be the same as Song Xing's. As for the two vice-sect leaders of the Tianjua sect, who had Dao realm cultivation, they would be the sword leaders. As for the other members of the Tianjua sect, according to Shao Chen, they would be arranged according to their cultivation. Those who had reached the elder level could become elders, those who reached the deacon level could become deacons, and so on. Song Xing and the others had no objection to Shao Chen's arrangement. In the next few days, Shao Chen cultivated while waiting for the arrival of the Tianjua sect led by Zhou Song. As for Zhou Song and Wu Huan joining the sword sect, Shao Chen had not announced it to the public yet. In a few days, the sword sect conference would be held. At that time, the sect leaders of the major forces in the Jian province would come to participate. Shao Chen planned to announce it to the public at that time. In this way, it would be more intimidating and could make the forces in the Jian province bow their head. Time passed day by day. There were only 4 days left before the sword sect conference. On this day, Zhou Song finally returned to the sword sect. Accompanying him were the two vice-sect leaders of the Tianjua sect. Zhou Song had already arranged the matters of the Tianjua sect. Most people were naturally willing to join the sword sect. There were a small number of people who were unwilling. Zhou Song did not make things difficult for them. After giving them a lot of cultivation resources, he let them leave. Now that the Tianjua sect was preparing to move to the Jian province, Zhou Song led the two vice-sect leaders of the Tianjua sect to the sword sect conference. In the main hall of the sword sect, Shao Chen, accompanied by Wu Huan, Song Xing, and the others, met the two vice-sect leaders of the Tianjua sect. One of them was called Dong Hu, and the other was called Yan Ling. They were both Dao realm experts. Obviously, the two of them knew Shao Chen's identity and agreed to join the sword sect. So when they saw Shao Chen, the two of them took the initiative to salute him. "Greetings, sect leader." Facing their salutes, Shao Chen hurriedly helped them up and smiled. "Seniors, there's no need to be so polite." Although Dong Hu and Yan Ling were weaker than Yang Song and the others and were only at the initial Dao realm, they were definitely able to be the sword heads of the sword sect. With the addition of the two of them, the strength of the sword sect instantly doubled. Looking at the upper echelons of the sword sect, there were 3 vice-sect leaders who had reached the end realm: Song Xing, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan. There were also 6 sword heads who had reached the Dao realm: Yang Song, Zhao Yu, Qian Ling, Li Sui, and Dong Hu and Yen Ling, who had just joined. It could be said that the current strength of the sword sect was infinitely close to the 10 great Lingtian sects. The only thing they were lacking was a true expert above the Dao realm. Xiao Chen couldn't do anything about this at the moment and could only take things slowly. In order to welcome Dong Hu and Yen Ling, Xiao Chen secretly held a banquet in his cave that day. Nangong Wan, Xiao Xiao, Song Xing, Zhou Song, Xianyuan Ling, Wine Daoist, Long Qing, and Qin Shuru all attended. During the banquet, Xiao Chen said to Dong Hu and Yen Ling with some self-blame, "Seniors, I've wronged the 2 of you today. When it's time for the sword sect meeting, I'll really hold a banquet for the 2 of you." For the time being, he didn't want to expose this matter. So, he naturally couldn't invite too many people to attend this banquet. Those present were all people around Xiao Chen. In the face of Xiao Chen's opening, Dong Hu and Yen Ling were very grateful. At the same time, the last bit of doubt they had about joining the sword sect quickly disappeared. In just a short month, Xiao Chen had forcefully raised the strength of the sword sect to a new level. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the current strength of the sword sect in the Great Thousand World, other than the 10 great Lingtian sects, they didn't need to fear any other forces. Even those top-notch first-rate forces would have to think twice before making a move against the sword sect. Perhaps it was because he was happy, Song Xing felt elated at this moment. With the help of alcohol, he unconsciously said, "In this way, our sword sect no longer needs to fear the threat of the Black Emperor sect." When he mentioned the Black Emperor sect, a trace of hatred flashed in Song Xing's eyes. However, other than that, there was also a trace of deep pride. This was because the sword sect did indeed have the strength to not fear the Black Emperor sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1943. The Black Emperor sect was a first-rate force, and it was one of the strongest first-rate forces under the 10 great Lingtian sect. There were not many of them, only 5 of them. The Black Emperor sect was one of the 5 great first-rate forces, and the most important condition to become a first-rate force was to possess the ability to attack the 10 great Lingtian sects. Otherwise, it would be absolutely impossible to become a first-rate force. The Black Emperor sect was the first-rate force closest to the Sword Province, and it was located on the left side of the Overlord Province. It was the well-deserved overlord of the Overlord Province. Moreover, the Black Emperor sect's sphere of influence was not limited to just the Overlord Province. The Black Emperor sect's sphere of influence spanned across 3 provinces, and there were even 3 first-rate forces that were subsidiary sects of the Black Emperor sect that followed the Black Emperor sect's lead. Previously, before Xiao Chen became the sect leader of the Sword sect, the Black Emperor sect could be said to be the greatest threat to the Sword sect. Everyone knew that the greatest wish of the 5 great first-rate sects was to enter the ranks of the Ling Tian sects, and the Black Emperor sect was naturally no exception. However, even though they already possessed the ability to attack the Ling Tian sects, there was still a certain gap between the Black Emperor sect and the Ling Tian sects. Although it was not large, it was like a chasm that the Black Emperor sect was unable to cross. It was precisely because of this that the Black Emperor sect naturally locked their gaze onto the Sword sect, because the Sword sect's foundation made the Black Emperor sect extremely envious. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Sword sect's foundation was probably even stronger than the Black Emperor sect. Therefore, the Black Emperor sect had always wanted to obtain the Sword sect's foundation, and the Sword sect had always been on guard against this. There were even many times when the Song Xing sect had no choice but to humiliate themselves and beg for peace. Every once in a while, they would offer many treasures to the Black Emperor sect in hopes of protecting the Sword sect. However, such a humiliating peace would not last for long. The Black Emperor sect was like a hungry wolf that could not be fed. No matter how many treasures you gave him, he would not be satisfied. There would be a day when the Black Emperor sect would definitely make a move on the Sword sect. If it was in the past, the Sword sect would definitely not care about the Black Emperor sect. But now, following the decline of the Sword sect, the Black Emperor sect was like a sharp jian-yi hanging over the Sword sect. It could take the life of the Sword sect at any time. Upon hearing Cang Xing mention the Black Emperor sect, Xiao Chen's expression changed slightly. He had been in the Great Thousand World for almost a year, so Xiao Chen naturally had some understanding of the Black Emperor sect. Furthermore, when he had just assumed the position of sect master, Cang Xing had already told Xiao Chen about the ambitions of the Black Emperor sect. Compared to the Bloodblade Valley, the Black Emperor sect was an existence that the Sword sect should really pay attention to and be careful of. He had always been worried that the Black Emperor sect would suddenly launch an attack, which would be a disaster for the entire Sword sect. But now, with the addition of Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the situation had been reversed. With the great increase in strength, the Sword sect was no longer weaker than the Black Emperor sect. Even if the Black Emperor sect wanted to make a move on the Sword sect would not be afraid at all. The increase in strength allowed Cang Xing and the other elders to see the hope of the Sword sect's rise. At the same time, the pressure that the Black Emperor sect brought to the Sword sect was also alleviated to the greatest extent at this moment. They didn't dare to say that they could defeat the Black Emperor sect, but at least they had the possibility of contending against the Black Emperor sect. They could be considered to be evenly matched. In this way, the Sword sect had undoubtedly grown from a sheep to a fierce tiger. The Black Emperor sect's attitude towards the Sword sect would definitely change from the previous contempt to fear and caution. They would no longer be as easy to manipulate as before. The original situation of a tiger entering a flock of sheep had now become a situation of two tigers fighting each other. This was a change brought about by Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen didn't have the time to pay attention to the Black Emperor sect for the time being. The most important thing now was to deal with the Sword sect and the internal affairs of the Jian province. He no longer thought about the Black Emperor sect. Perhaps there would be a battle between the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect in the future, but it was clearly not now. After discussing how to settle the people of the Tianzhu sect, Xiao Chen asked about some matters regarding the Sword sect assembly. This time's Sword sect assembly was also very important to the Sword sect. The decline over the years had caused the Sword sect's control over the Jian province to become weaker and weaker. The purpose of this Sword sect assembly was to rope in, intimidate, and suppress the various major forces in the Jian province and let them clearly know who was the true overlord of the Jian province. Roping in a group, suppressing a group, intimidating a group, this was the main purpose of this Sword sect assembly. Therefore, Xiao Chen had been concealing the matter of Zhou Song and Wu Huan joining the Sword sect assembly, because announcing this matter at the Sword sect assembly would obviously have a better effect. In the face of Xiao Chen's inquiry, Cang Xing told Xiao Chen the truth about the Sword sect assembly. After learning that everything went smoothly, Xiao Chen nodded slightly and said, "It's been such a long time. Thank you for your hard work during this period of time. Sect Master, you're too kind. This is what this subordinate should do." Upon hearing this, Cang Xing respectfully replied. The matters of the Swords Gate Conference proceeded in an orderly manner. As time passed, the headmasters of the various forces in the Jian province arrived at the Swords Gate one after another. Naturally, the Swords Gate had already arranged their accommodations for them. None of the major forces in the Sword sect were absent from the Sword sect assembly this time. Moreover, due to the incident in the Bloodblade Valley, the leaders of these forces were very polite to the disciples of the Sword sect. Even when facing the ordinary disciples of the sword sect, these leaders restrained their previous contempt. The disciples of the sword sect could naturally sense the changes in these leaders. For a moment, they seemed to finally feel the pride of being a disciple of the sword sect. It was also the first time they felt proud to be a disciple of the sword sect. Looking at these leaders, which one of them didn't have a higher cultivation than them? But so what? As long as they wore the uniform of the sword sect, these leaders would still be respectful to them and wouldn't dare to overstep their boundaries in the slightest. Over the next few days, the expressions of the disciples of the sword sect became more and more confident. Even when facing these leaders, they could hold their heads high and face them calmly. Seeing the changes in these disciples, Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others were secretly delighted. In a trance, they seemed to have seen the sword sect at its peak. Back then, as a disciple of the sword sect, even when facing the elders of a first-rate sword sect or a deputy sect leader, the disciples of the sword sect could calmly face them. The reason for this wasn't because they were strong, but because the sword sect behind them was very powerful. It was so powerful that the elders and deputy sect leaders of the first-rate forces didn't dare to offend them in the slightest. Outside the mountain gate, a group of disciples of the sword sect stood dignified, welcoming the arrival of the leaders and experts of the various major forces. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1944. I'll remember it in a second. Wonderful, no pop-up window free reading. It could be said that the sword sect had undergone earth-shattering changes. If the sword sect was like a gloomy sunset that made people feel hopeless, then this time, from Song Xing and the others to the lowest level of ordinary disciples, everyone's face was filled with confidence and pride like the rising sun. Although it wasn't glorious, it filled people with hope. The sect masters of the various major forces also deeply understood this point. Especially outside the mountain gate, the sect masters stepped onto the sword sect on foot. In the sky, several sword sect elders sat cross-legged, in charge of maintaining order, while the disciples were in charge of registration and settling the sect masters who came. It was a scene of prosperity. For this sword sect assembly, everyone who came was not allowed to fly. They had to step onto the sword sect on foot. If anyone was found flying in the sky, no matter who it was, the sword sect elders would immediately take action and arrest them. Seeing the sect masters step onto the sword sect, the disciples of the sword sect took the initiative to step forward and saluted in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Please. It was completely different from the sword sect from before. As a result, the sect masters naturally didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. In the sword sect, with the arrival of the sect masters, it became increasingly lively. As there were still 2 days before the start of the Swords Gate Conference, the headmasters who had arrived earlier had nothing better to do, so they gathered together and chatted with each other. The changes in the sword sect are really amazing. In a cave, several sect masters sat together. One of them took a sip of wine and lamented. Upon hearing his words, another sect master nodded in agreement. Indeed. Although this is a tiger that has fallen to the plains, I wouldn't dare to say that. A tiger is still a tiger, and an overlord is still an overlord. The sword sect was like a tiger that had fallen from grace. But even so, a tiger was still a tiger. This would not change. I wonder what plans the new sect master has for the sword sect's convention. The few of them were silent for a moment before one of the elders said worriedly. Hearing this, the first person to speak laughed and said, "What other plans could they have? They just want us to submit. After all, the Sword Province used to belong to the Sword Sect. If it weren't for the Blood Blade Valley, the Sword Province wouldn't have become like this." That's true. But now that the Bloodblade Valley has fled, the Sword Sect will probably reign supreme in the province once more. The old man nodded. The sect masters had basically guessed the sword sect's intentions. This was normal. After all, the sword sect's intentions were now very obvious. Besides, Xiao Chen had never thought of hiding these things. Xiao Chen left the trivial matters to his subordinates to handle. As the sect master, what Xiao Chen needed to do was to appear as the new sect master of the sword sect when the sword sect assembly began. But this time, apart from appearing as the new sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen had other plans, and that was to introduce Qin Shuru and the other 4 ladies. As his wives, Xiao Chen naturally had to formally introduce them to everyone as Xiao Chen's wives. After discussing with Song Xing didn't have any objections. After all, Qin Shuru and the other 4 ladies were the 5 wives of the sword sect. Even Song Xing had to respectfully greet them when he saw them. The preparations were left to Song Xing while Xiao Chen returned to his cave residence. Qin Shuru and the other 4 ladies had already come out of seclusion. Long Qing, Xian Yuanling, and the Wine Taoist were still in seclusion. Originally, Xiao Chen also planned to bring Long Qing and Xian Yuanli to participate in the sword sect assembly. Unfortunately, the 2 of them were in seclusion. Xiao Chen couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't interrupt their seclusion because of this matter. After thinking about it, Xiao Chen decided to forget about it. For Long Qing and Xian Yuanling, cultivation was the most important thing at the moment. If their cultivation was too low, even if they were Xiao Chen's elder brother and second sister, Xiao Chen couldn't give them too high of a status. Because of this, the people below would be dissatisfied. There was always a difference between the 2 of them and Qin Shuru and the other 4 ladies. Even if Qin Shuru and the other 4 ladies' cultivation wasn't high enough, their status was already determined based on the fact that they were Xiao Chen's wives. However, Long Qing and Xian Yuanling were different. In the cave residence, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and the other 4 ladies sat in a pavilion in the garden. Xiao Chen told the 5 ladies about his idea. Hearing this, the 5 ladies couldn't help but be excited, but at the same time, there was a trace of nervousness. They all looked at Xiao Chen. Tian Yu and Hong Xiu, the 2 most lively ladies, couldn't help but ask, "Husband, can we really go?" Xiao Chen wanted the 5 of them to participate in the sword sect assembly with him. The 5 of them naturally wouldn't refuse. They were even very excited, but at the same time, they were very nervous and even a bit afraid. Xiao Chen smiled. "Of course. You're my wives. It would be against the rules if you didn't participate in something as important as the sword sect assembly," Xiao Chen said with a smile. Hearing this, the 5 girls smiled sweetly and nodded slightly. Time passed very quickly. 2 days passed very quickly. On the morning of the 3rd day, the sky had just begun to brighten. However, the sword sect was already bustling with activity. This was because today was the day of the sword sect assembly, which was equivalent to Xiao Chen's succession ceremony. One after another, the maids were running back and forth around the main peak of Swords Gate, and on the main square, the pavilions were already completed. They were extremely beautiful, especially the tallest pavilion in the front. It was even more majestic, and from afar it gave off a sense of majesty. Early in the morning, the elite disciples of the sword sect were all dispatched. The deacons and elders were also extremely busy. Around the main square, the elders and deacons had already led the elite disciples to stand guard. The entire sword sect was extremely busy. At the same time, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, Xiao Qing, and Bai Ruiyue had already finished dressing up. Xiao Chen's dressing was much simpler. He only had to comb his hair and put on a set of purple gold robes. However, Qin Shuru and the other 5 ladies were much more troublesome. They hadn't slept the entire night, so the 5 of them still hadn't finished dressing up. Xiao Chen and Xiao Qing helplessly sat in the courtyard and waited. Bai Ruiyue wasn't ready either. Looking at Xiao Chen, Xiao Qing's heart was filled with pride. His greatest pride in life was having Xiao Chen as his son. Looking at Xiao Chen now, he was wearing a purple gold robe. His snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. His calm face gave off a sense of majesty that was difficult to ignore. He indeed had a trace of the majesty of the sword sect master. Chapter 1945. Feeling that Xiao Qing was sizing him up, Xiao Chen said helplessly, "Father, why do you keep looking at me? Haha, I want to see what ability I have to give birth to such a son." Xiao Chen was in a good mood and laughed heartily. Xiao Qing was indeed in a good mood. Hearing this, Xiao Chen also smiled and didn't say anything. While the father and son were talking, Bai Ruyue and Qin Shura's 5 women also walked out of the room. It was obvious that all the women, including Bai Ruyue, had dressed up meticulously. They were already peerlessly beautiful, and now they were so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off them. Striding forward, Xiao Chen arrived in front of Qin Shura's 5 women and said with a smile, "My wives are really beautiful." Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the 5 women all rolled their eyes at Xiao Chen charmingly. Bai Ruyue said with some dissatisfaction, "Humph, brat, what about your mother? Beautiful, beautiful. Madam is the most beautiful." Bai Ruyue had just finished speaking, and before Xiao Chen could reply, Xiao Qing said with a smile. Hearing Xiao Qing's words, Bai Ruyue rolled her eyes at him and said, "Go away, you're always so frivolous." Although she was scolding him, the smile on Bai Ruyue's face disappeared. Everyone was preparing to play. At this time, Yang Song also strode into the courtyard and said respectfully to Xiao Chen, "Sect Master, everything is ready." Everything was ready and waiting for Xiao Chen and the others to go. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled and nodded. "Thank you for your trouble, senior." In the main square, there were many elders and disciples of the sword sect in charge of guarding. The specially built pavilions were already filled with the sect masters of the various major forces. At the same time, on both sides of Xiao Chen's pavilion, Song Xing, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and the others were already in position. However, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others had yet to appear. After all, it was not the right time. Song Xing sat alone in the pavilion on the left side of Xiao Chen's pavilion. There were a total of 3 chairs on the second floor of the pavilion, but the other 2 were empty. On the right side of Xiao Chen's pavilion, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Qian Ling sat upright. There were a total of 6 chairs, and there were also 3 empty chairs. As for the empty chairs beside Zhao Yu and the others in the Song Xing, the various sect leaders were naturally puzzled. However, at this time, their attention was more focused on the pavilion that belonged to Xiao Chen. Although the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen, had yet to appear, there were already 2 people sitting on the pavilion. Needless to say, these 2 people were naturally Nangong Guan and Xiao Xiao. Some of the sect leaders present recognized Nangong Guan and Xiao Xiao. After all, one of them was the head of the family Nangong, and the other was the holy maiden of the Moon Palace. In the Great Thousand World, they could be considered top-notch figures. This was especially true for Xiao Xiao. Her identity as the holy maiden of the Moon Palace made her more dazzling than Nangong Guan in certain aspects. Countless pairs of eyes fell on Nangong Guan and Xiao Xiao. However, the 2 of them were already used to this and were able to deal with it calmly. They did not have to wait for long. Soon, Xiao Chen and his family, led by Yang Song, appeared at the front of the pavilion, which was also the tallest and largest one. After Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue appeared, they went straight to their seats and sat down. The 2 old men did not have any intention of being in the limelight. Furthermore, if it were not for Xiao Chen's repeated requests, perhaps the 2 old men would not have appeared. On the contrary, Xiao Chen, accompanied by Qin Shuru and the 5 women, stood high up on the pavilion's rooftop. Yang Song was a step behind and also stood respectfully. Following the appearance of Xiao Chen, many of the sword sect's elders, deacons and disciples, including Tsang Xing, Zhao Yu, and the others who had already sat down, respectfully bowed and greeted them. "Greetings, sect leader." "Greetings, sect leader's wife." The sword sect's members bowed and greeted them. Seeing this, the sect leaders of the various large factions naturally hurriedly stood up and respectfully greeted, "Greetings, sect leader, Madam Sect Leader." Everyone bowed in unison. Xiao Chen's expression was indifferent as he said, "Everyone, please dispense with the formalities." Facing the greetings of so many experts, Xiao Chen's face did not show the slightest trace of nervousness. Although many of the people present had higher cultivations than Xiao Chen still did not show the slightest trace of nervousness. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone slowly straightened their backs and looked at Xiao Chen. The sect leaders of the various large factions were unfamiliar with Xiao Chen. It could be said that this was the first time they had seen Xiao Chen. For a moment, each of the sect leaders had different expressions on their faces. Xiao Chen was indeed too young. Being able to become the sect leader of the sword sect at such a young age made all the sect leaders envious. Even so, no one dared to show the slightest disrespect. In addition to being curious about Xiao Chen, when they saw Qin Shuru and the other 5 women beside Xiao Chen, everyone's expression changed. Beautiful, they were simply too beautiful. Standing beside Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru and the other 5 women were simply as beautiful as fairies. Especially today, the 5 women had specially dressed up, which made them even more beautiful. Many people were incomparably envious of Xiao Chen. Not only did he become the sect leader of the sword sect at such a young age, but he also had 5 such outstanding beauties by his side. This was simply the pinnacle of his life. Status, power, beauty, Xiao Chen could be said to have it all. Most importantly, Xiao Chen's age was the most important. At such a young age, he had already reached a height that ordinary people would not be able to reach in a lifetime or even a few lifetimes. How could they not be envious? All of them looked at Xiao Chen with envy. Compared to Xiao Chen, facing the gazes of the crowd, especially when the cultivation of these people was not low. For example, almost none of the sect leaders' cultivation was below the immortal emperor realm. They were all higher than Qin Shuru and the other 5 women. Therefore, the 5 women could not help but feel a little nervous at this moment. Sensing the nervousness of the 5 women beside him, Xiao Chen smiled and transmitted his voice to the 5 women. "Relax, it's fine." Xiao Chen gestured for the 5 girls to relax. Then, he looked at the leaders of the major sects and the people of the Sword Gate. His voice was amplified by his spiritual power and spread throughout the main square. "Everyone, Junior Xiao Chen is fortunate to have been recognized by the heaven-breaking sword sovereign. I was fortunate enough to become the successor of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign and succeed the position of sect leader of the sword sect. Junior knows that I am young, my cultivation is insufficient, and my experience is insufficient. After succeeding the position of sect leader, it was all thanks to the help of Senior Tsang Xing and the others that I have today. Junior sincerely thanks Senior Tsang Xing for his efforts and support. Of course, I also thank all the sect leaders for their support. Many thanks to everyone." His voice was calm and indifferent. After he finished speaking, Xiao Chen cupped his hands and bowed to everyone present. His attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. There was not a trace of arrogance or inferiority complex. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1946. Xiao Chen said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. As soon as his voice fell, Tsang Xing, who was sitting in the pavilion, immediately bowed respectfully. "Sect Master, you're being too serious. This subordinate is willing to sacrifice his life for Sect Master." Although Xiao Chen was thanking Tsang Xing, everyone present was smart. Naturally, no one would accept Xiao Chen's bow with a clear conscience. This was especially so after Tsang Xing took the initiative to speak. Yang Song, the others, and the members of the sword sect also bowed respectfully. This subordinate is willing to lay down his life for sect master and follow sect master to the death. The members of the sword sect stood up and replied. Although some of the sect masters present had other thoughts, they had no choice but to bow respectfully at this moment. We are willing to lay down our lives for sect master and pledge our lives to follow sect master. Xiao Chen naturally couldn't completely believe the words of the sect masters. However, Xiao Chen didn't really care if they were loyal to the sword sect or not. After all, the purpose of this sword sect assembly was to beat some of the major forces. Moreover, the loyalty of the major forces depended more on the strength of the sword sect. The stronger the sword sect was, the less likely it was for them to rebel. Sometimes, strength could be linked to loyalty. After all, people would die for wealth, and birds would die for food. If the major forces wanted to develop, they would naturally need a strong backer. And the stronger the backer, the more they would naturally pledge their lives to follow. Xiao Chen smiled and said, "All right. With everyone's help, I believe that the sword sect will definitely be able to regain its former glory." At this moment, Xiao Chen's arrogance soared to the sky. Although he was only a hypocrite at the immortal emperor realm, Xiao Chen seemed to have the aura of a hero in everyone's eyes. His purple-gold robe made him look even more majestic and dazzling. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen took the initiative to raise his wine cup and said to everyone present, "Come, everyone, let's drink this cup." After drinking it in one gulp, Qin Shuru and the others took the initiative to return to their seats. Yang Song had also returned to the pavilion that belonged to the few sword heads. Only Xiao Chen was left standing proudly alone. He swept his gaze across the various sect masters present, and a trace of a smile flashed in his eyes. This was the real highlight of the show. The corners of Xiao Chen's mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. He put down the cup in his hand and slowly said, "Sect masters. As the sect master of the sword sect, I naturally have to take responsibility for the glory of the sword sect." Back then, the prestige of the sword sect could be said to have enveloped the entire vast 1,000 domains. Now, with the departure of the sword venerable, the sword sect has gradually fallen. Now, it has fallen from its divine altar and is only a disgrace to our generation. Now that I have received the recognition of the sword venerable and have succeeded as the sect master of the sword sect, I naturally have to carry on the sword venerable's legacy and bring the sword sect back to its former glory. Today, taking advantage of this grand event, I would like to announce two things. Second senior brother, third senior brother. As he spoke, Xiao Chen looked at the empty void in front of him and said. Following Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song and Wu Huan appeared out of thin air in front of Xiao Chen and stood in the air. When the two of them appeared, they didn't hide their auras at all. They even deliberately exposed it. Feeling the terrifying auras from Zhou Song and Wu Huan, many of the sect masters present, including the people of the sword sect, had a change in expression. Many people couldn't help but say, "End realm experts." It was certain that Zhou Song and Wang Huan were end realm experts. Sensing the changes in everyone's expression, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Perhaps some of you don't recognize the two people in front of you. This is Zhou Song, the sect master of the Tianjue sect. This is Wu Huan." Xiao Chen smiled and introduced the two people. Hearing this, many of the sect masters quickly reacted. Perhaps many of them hadn't seen Zhou Song and Wu Huan before, but most of them had heard of their names, especially Zhou Song. No matter how famous the Tianjue sect was, it could be considered a first-rate sect and had some fame in the vast 1,000 domains. Their gazes towards Zhou Song and Wu Huan gradually changed. At the same time, the various sect masters were also curious. Why did the two of them appear here? Also, what was Xiao Chen's goal? They were curious, and soon everyone had an answer. After a pause, the smile on Xiao Chen's face became more and more confident. He looked at everyone and said loudly, "Today, Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the two seniors, have joined my sword sect. Today, I, as the sect master of the sword sect, confer the two of you as the vice sect masters of the sword sect. Your status and position are the same as Senior Tsang Xing." When Xiao Chen said this, everyone was in an uproar. Not only the various sect masters, but even the people of the sword sect were all dumbfounded. Two End Realm experts joining the sword sect, how was that possible? If that was the case, wouldn't the sword sect have 3 End Realm experts? Wouldn't they be even stronger than before He Ying escaped? They didn't expect that Zhou Song and Wu Huan would actually join the sword sect and become the vice sect masters of the sword sect. Along with Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song and Wu Huan bowed respectfully to Xiao Chen. "Thank you, sect master." In front of so many people, and at such a serious moment, Zhou Song and Wu Huan didn't acknowledge Xiao Chen as their junior brother. Instead, they respectfully called him sect master. Xiao Chen nodded towards the two of them. Then, Zhou Song and Wu Huan sat beside Song Xing looking at the three of them. The various sect masters felt really complicated. 3 vice sect masters, these were 3 End Realm experts. All of a sudden, the sword sect's position in the hearts of the various sect masters rose by a lot. However, this wasn't the end. Just as Zhou Song and Wu Huan sat down, Xiao Chen opened his mouth. Dong Hu, Yan Ling, at the same time, along with Xiao Chen's words, Dong Hu and Yan Ling appeared in front of Xiao Chen. They stood in the air and their Dao Realm aura surged into the sky. 2 Dao Realm experts? Everyone's expressions changed when they saw Dong Hu and Yan Ling. Even though Dong Hu and Yan Ling were only at the Dao Realm, it was still shocking. At the very least, there were no Dao Realm powerhouses among the various forces present. The strongest among these sect leaders was only at the level of Great Fulfillment Realm, Enlightenment Realm. Suddenly, 2 Dao Realm experts appeared. At this moment, Xiao Chen didn't keep them in suspense and directly said, "Senior Dong Hu, Senior Yan Ling, the two of you were the vice sect masters of the Tianjue sect. Now you have followed Senior Zhou Song and joined my sword sect. Today, as the sect master of the sword sect, I appoint the two of you as the sword head of the sword sect." Dong Hu and Yan Ling joined the sword sect and became the sword heads of the sword sect like Yang Song and the other 3. With that, the original 4 sword heads of the sword sect became the 6 sword heads of the sword sect. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1947. The addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Dong Hu, and Yan Ling shocked all the sect leaders present. However, this was just the beginning. What shocked them even more was yet to come. After announcing that the 4 of them had joined the sword sect, Xiao Chen paused. Then, he announced that the Tianjue sect would merge into the sword sect, as well as the alliance between the family Nangong and the sword sect. All of a sudden, along with Xiao Chen's words, everyone knew that the strength of the sword sect had increased tremendously. Compared to before, it was more than twice as strong. 3 End Realm experts and 6 Dao Realm experts. Such top fighting strength could already be ranked among the top powers. Along with Xiao Chen announcing the addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others, all of a sudden, the sect leaders present didn't dare to have any second thoughts. What a joke! Before, the sword sect could already dominate the sword state. Now, with so many experts joining the sword sect, the various powers in the sword state didn't dare to have any second thoughts. Before, some of the sect leaders felt that the Blood Blade Valley wouldn't let this matter rest. Now, their thoughts had completely changed. These sect leaders didn't know whether or not the Blood Blade Valley would let this matter rest. However, one day, everyone was certain that if the Blood Blade Valley dared to return to the sword state, there would only be one outcome: destruction. With the current strength of the sword sect, it wouldn't be difficult for them to wipe out the Bloodblade Valley. Looking at the strength of both sides, not to mention other things, just the number of End Realm experts, the Bloodblade Valley only had the Valley Head. Even with the traitor Hieng, there were only 2 of them. On the other hand, the Sword Sect had 3 End Realm experts. Apart from that, the number of Dao Realm experts in the Sword Sect completely crushed the Bloodblade Valley. Under such a comparison, the Bloodblade Valley didn't have any chance of going up against the Sword Sect. There was no doubt that the Sword Sect would be in charge of everything in Jian Province from now on. Even if the Bloody Blade Valley returned one day, it would not change anything. Everyone stared blankly at Xiao Chen on the high platform. Compared to the shock of the sect leaders, the disciples and elders of the Sword Sect were all extremely excited. As a member of the Sword Sect, the stronger the Sword Sect was, the better it would be for them. Who wouldn't want their sect to become stronger? With a faint smile on his face, Xiao Chen looked at the changes in the expressions of the people below. He knew that the goal of this Sword Sect conference had been achieved. Those sect leaders who weren't honest before probably wouldn't dare to be disloyal after this incident. However, while everyone was in shock and excitement, a spatial crack tore open in the sky all of a sudden. Then, 4 middle-aged men in black dragon robes strode out from it. Everyone was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the 4 middle-aged men. Soon after, someone muttered, "Black Emperor Sect." Judging from their attire, everyone guessed that they were from the Black Emperor Sect. In an instant, everyone's expression changed. Today was the day of the Swords Gate Conference, and the people of the Black Emperor Sect had coincidentally appeared at this time. If it was a coincidence, no one would believe it. How could there be such a coincidence in this world? It was obvious that it had been planned long ago. The Black Emperor Sect's coveting of the Sword Sect wasn't a secret in the Dominator and Sword Sect. Many people knew that the Black Emperor Sect had always wanted to annex the Sword Sect to become one of the top 10 Lingtian sects. In the past, the Black Emperor Sect had attacked the Sword Sect more than once. In the face of the Black Emperor Sect, the Sword Sect had always been incomparably sullen. Under everyone's gaze, the leader of the 4 Black Emperor Sect powerhouses looked down at Xiao Chen with a disdainful smile and sneered. Why didn't the new sect leader of the Sword Sect bow to the emissary of our Black Emperor Sect? Although Xiao Chen's succession as the sect leader of the Sword Sect wasn't announced to the public, the Black Emperor Sect had always been paying attention to the Sword Sect. Therefore, this matter wasn't hidden from them. In the eyes of the Black Emperor Sect, Xiao Chen was probably just a brat who they didn't need to care about at all. Moreover, the Black Emperor Sect had always seen the Sword Sect as a piece of fat meat in their mouth. They could eat it whenever they wanted. Therefore, the leader of the Black Emperor Sect powerhouse's tone was filled with disdain. He didn't put Xiao Chen in his eyes at all. However, the moment he said this, before Xiao Chen could reply, Song Xing had already coldly shouted, "You're courting death." The leader of the Black Emperor Sect powerhouse was Song Xing Yang Song, and the others knew that he was one of the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor Sect. The Sword Sect had 6 sword heads and the Black Emperor Sect had 8 martial marquises. Similar to the Sword Sect's sword heads, the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor Sect were all at the Dao realm. Apart from the 8 martial marquises, the Black Emperor Sect also had 4 princes who were all at the End Realm. This time, the Black Emperor Sect sent a martial marquis to the Sword Sect. Their goal was obvious. They just wanted to give the Sword Sect and Xiao Chen a show of strength. They wanted to tell Xiao Chen that the Sword Sect would belong to the Black Emperor Sect sooner or later. Which was why this martial marquis of the Black Emperor Sect chose to appear at the Sword Sect meeting. Facing the arrogance of this martial marquis, a cold intent flashed in Song Xing's eyes. Since Xiao Chen was the sect leader of the Sword Sect, he naturally wouldn't allow others to humiliate him. This was why killing intent rose in Song Xing's heart. Facing the cold Song Xing, this martial marquis wasn't nervous at all. Although he was only at the Tao realm and Song Xing was an End realm expert, so what? Could it be that Song Xing dared to attack him? It wasn't like he hadn't come to the sword sect before. At that time, be it Song Xing or He Ying, they were all respectful to the Black Emperor sect. Even if they were End realm experts, they didn't dare to offend the Black Emperor sect. Maybe because of all the things that happened before, the Black Emperor sect people instinctively looked down on the sword sect. In their eyes, no matter what, the sword sect didn't dare to offend the Black Emperor sect. A cold smile still hung on his face as this martial marquis looked at Song Xing expressionlessly. Why, deputy sect leader wants to attack me? While speaking, the mocking expression on this martial marquis face became thicker and thicker. It felt like he was saying, "Do you dare to attack me?" Facing the mocking of this martial marquis, the coldness in Song Xing's eyes became thicker and thicker. The various sect leaders all had different thoughts facing such a situation. However, many of them unknowingly placed their attention on Shao Chun. As the new sect leader of the sword sect, everyone wanted to see how Shao Chun would treat the Black Emperor sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1948. Shao Chun was the new sect master of the sword sect. Everyone present wanted to see what kind of attitude Shao Chun would have when facing the Black Emperor sect. Would he still be as accommodating as before, or would he be forceful? Everyone's gazes involuntarily turned towards Shao Chun. At the same time, Song Xing, Yang Song and the other higher-ups of the sword sect also turned their gazes towards Shao Chun, waiting for Shao Chun's decision. Facing the gazes of the crowd, the smile on Shao Chun's face gradually became cold and stern. Raising his head to look at the four people from the Black Emperor sect in the sky, Shao Chun said indifferently, "They're really standing so high. Who can bring the four of them down for me?" It was a baffling sentence. Hearing this, many of the sect leaders present were still unable to react. For a moment, they did not know what Shao Chun meant. However, at this moment, Song Xing, Yang Song, Dong Hu and Qianling had already stood up and respectfully bowed to Shao Chun. Yes. With that, the four of them took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of the four people from the Black Emperor sect. After that, Song Xing took the lead and extended his hand towards the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis as he coldly said, "Go down." Without any hesitation, he chose to attack. Seeing this, the martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect was stunned at first, then he looked at Song Xing with an angry face and shouted, "Song Xing, are you crazy? You dare to attack me? Once I step into the Black Emperor sect, I will definitely flatten your sword sect." He never thought that Song Xing would actually dare to attack him. Before this, when the envoys of the Black Emperor sect came to the sword sect was not respectful. Not to mention attacking, they did not even dare to offend them. However, this time, the sword sect changed their usual attitude, and did not give the Black Emperor sect any face. Even after hearing the words of the martial marquis, that Song Xing did not have the slightest intention of holding back. He sent out a palm strike and fiercely suppressed the martial marquis. Faced with the attack of Song Xing's group, the four people from the Black Emperor sect would naturally not allow themselves to be captured without putting up a fight. Under the lead of this Wu Ho, they immediately prepared to counterattack. However, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. In fact, there was no objection to this kind of resistance. A cold glint flashed across Shao Chun's eyes as he looked at the four people in the sky, whose fate was unknown. He laughed coldly in his heart. These four people thought that they were from the Black Emperor sect and appeared in the sword sect so arrogantly. Moreover, the person leading them was only a martial marquis from the Black Emperor sect, a Tao realm expert. When facing him, he did not show the slightest bit of respect. Since that was the case with Xiao Chen's character, he would naturally not give the four of them any face. As for offending the Black Emperor sect, Xiao Chen was not afraid of that at all. Originally, after learning about the matter of the Black Emperor sect, Xiao Chen had already made a decision. In Xiao Chen's opinion, the compromise from before would not be able to save the Sword sect. The ambition of the Black Emperor sect was as clear as day. Blindly giving in would only make them want a yard after taking an inch. Only by being tough and making the Black Emperor sect fearful would he be able to protect the Sword sect. Therefore, there was no need to doubt Xiao Chen's attitude towards the Black Emperor sect. If they wanted to fight, they would fight. From today onwards, the Sword sect would not give in. Coldly looking at the great battle in the sky, the space where the 8 people were fighting had already been sealed by Cang Xing. Therefore, the aftermath of the battle would not affect the people present. The 4 people from the Black Emperor sect resisted with all their might. However, such resistance could only last for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. After that, the 4 of them were taken down by Cang Xing and the others. A palm struck the abdomen of the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Under this palm, the martial marquis had already been seriously injured by Cang Xing. Obviously, he was not a match for Cang Xing. There was a huge gap between the two of them. With Cang Xing's strength, he could be compared to the 4 great princes of the Black Emperor sect. After heavily injuring him with a palm strike, Cang Xing did not stop and directly sealed the martial marquis's cultivation. Seeing this, the martial marquis furiously roared. "Cang Xing, you dare?" "Noisy, why wouldn't I dare? A mere martial marquis. Do you think you are one of the 4 great princes? Get down." Hearing the martial marquis's furious roar, Cang Xing coldly replied. Following which, with a kick, he immediately kicked the martial marquis down. The leading martial marquis was directly taken down by Cang Xing. As for the other 3, they were not a match for Yang Song and the others. They had long been taken down by the sealed cultivation. The 4 of them were blasted down from the sky by Cang Xing. Just as they landed on the ground, a disciple of the Sword sect came forward and controlled the 4 of them. Without any explanation, the 4 of them were escorted in front of Xiao Chen. "Kneel." After escorting the 4 of them to the pavilion where Xiao Chen was, a disciple fiercely kicked the leg of the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis. Immediately, the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis directly knelt down. Looking down at the 4 people of the Black Emperor sect from above, Xiao Chen's face revealed a somewhat evil smile. At the same time, the martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect also furiously raised his head to look at Xiao Chen and coldly roared. "Your Sword sect is courting death. Let me go, otherwise in the future, my Black Emperor sect will definitely flatten your Sword sect." "You don't know what you're talking about." Things had already reached such a stage, and this martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect actually dared to threaten him. Xiao Chen coldly said. Just as Xiao Chen's voice rang out, a disciple immediately gave him a slap and coldly roared. "Impudent!" As one of the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor sect, he was actually slapped by a disciple of the Sword sect. Moreover, it was a slap to the face. There was a thick sense of humiliation in his heart. However, because his cultivation was sealed, even if he was sullen in his heart, he did not have the slightest ability to resist. Cang Xing and the other 3 had already returned to their seats and respectfully bowed towards Xiao Chen. Towards this, Xiao Chen also faintly nodded his head. After the 4 of them sat down, Xiao Chen opened his mouth and spoke to the 4 people of the Black Emperor sect. "I know about the ambitions of your Black Emperor sect, but today I can clearly tell you that from today onwards, my Sword sect will no longer be courteous to your Black Emperor sect. If your Black Emperor sect wants to fight, then fight. My Sword sect will accompany you at any time." Changing from his previous compromising attitude, Xiao Chen's attitude towards the Black Emperor sect was already incomparably clear. If they wanted to fight, then fight. This was Xiao Chen's attitude towards the Black Emperor sect. They had been waiting for Xiao Chen's attitude. At this moment, when they heard these words, many of the sect heads present were stunned and could not help but think in their hearts. This new sect master's attitude is really unyielding. This is almost equivalent to declaring war on the Black Emperor sect. Indeed, Xiao Chen's words could already be understood as a declaration of war on the Black Emperor sect. The Sword sect, which had previously compromised to the Black Emperor sect, had a 180-degree change in attitude after Xiao Chen came to power. They had become incomparably unyielding, and were not afraid of the Black Emperor sect's deterrence in the slightest. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1949. If he wanted to fight, he would fight. That was Xiao Chen's answer. The martial marquis from the Black Emperor sect was stunned for a moment before he shouted angrily, Are you crazy? Do you know the consequences of declaring war on my Black Emperor sect? He never thought that Xiao Chen would be so unyielding. The Sword sect definitely wouldn't have dared to act like this when facing the Black Emperor sect. Even though the Sword sect was ranked among the top 10 heaven ascending sects, that was in the past. The current Sword sect couldn't be compared to the Black Emperor sect at all. The Black Emperor sect was one of the top 5 super first-rate forces in the Great Thousand World. They had 3 first-rate forces like the Sword sect under them. Yet, the Sword sect actually dared to declare war on the Black Emperor sect. Crazy. In the eyes of the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis, Xiao Chen was definitely crazy. Or rather, he didn't know what was good for him. However, Xiao Chen didn't seem to care about the martial marquis's angry shout. This person obviously didn't know that the Sword sect was no longer the same as before. Previously, when Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others joined the Sword sect, this martial marquis hadn't arrived yet, so he naturally didn't know what had happened before. Moreover, he clearly didn't expect that in such a short period of time, the Sword sect had undergone such earth-shattering changes. Its strength had more than doubled compared to before. With the current Sword sect's strength, even if it couldn't compare to the Black Emperor sect, it was definitely not in existence without the ability to retaliate. Even if the Black Emperor sect could destroy the Sword sect, the consequences were probably not something the Black Emperor sect could bear. With the current strength of the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect, if the Black Emperor sect wanted to destroy the Sword sect, they had to be prepared to suffer heavy losses. To put it bluntly, both sides would suffer heavy losses. The Sword sect would be destroyed, but the Black Emperor sect would definitely be crippled. It was even possible that they would fall from being a super first-rate force. In the past, the Sword sect was a piece of fatty meat that could be eaten at any time in the eyes of the Black Emperor sect, but now this piece of fatty meat had become a stubborn rock. Perhaps the Black Emperor sect could still eat it, but they would definitely lose a mouthful of teeth. Ignoring the Marquis's angry shout, Xiao Chen looked down on him and said indifferently, "Since you said it's a declaration of war, then so be it. But since that's the case, kill." Kill? Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis was immediately stunned. Xiao Chen wanted to kill him? The marquis was stunned at first, thinking that he had misheard. But when he saw the Sword sect elder beside him unsheathing his sword, he realized that he hadn't misheard. And Xiao Chen wasn't joking with him. Xiao Chen wants to kill me this. I never thought that I would one day fall in the Sword's gate. The martial marquis regained his senses, and a flash of fear flashed across his eyes. He then lifted his head and shouted at Xiao Chen, who was on top of the pavilion. "You can't kill me. If you kill me, the Black Emperor sect won't let you go. Do you really want to fight to the death with the Black Emperor sect? Bastard, you!" At death's door, the Marquis still wanted to use the Black Emperor sect to threaten Xiao Chen. Unfortunately, before he could finish, the elder beside him had already slashed down with his sword. His voice came to an abrupt halt. At the same time, a bloody head flew into the air. When this martial marquis was killed, the other 3 disciples of the Black Emperor sect were naturally not spared. They were directly killed in front of everyone present. The powerhouse of the Black Emperor sect had come with an aggressive aura, but he was killed right in front of everyone's eyes. As the 4 bloody heads flew into the air, everyone present was stunned. At the same time, there was a hint of fear and horror in their eyes when they looked at Xiao Chen. In the beginning, these sect leaders only treated Xiao Chen as a lucky brat. But today, after witnessing Xiao Chen's ruthless means, perhaps no one dared to think so anymore. Although Xiao Chen was young, his courage was boundless. He even dared to kill a marquis of the Black Emperor sect. Who wouldn't Xiao Chen dare not kill? Now that the Sword's Gate was under Xiao Chen's control, it was completely different from before. It was no longer the decadent Sword's Gate of the past. Instead, it had become firm and domineering, like an unsheathed sword. Wherever it went, no one would be able to avoid its sharp edge. The horror in his eyes didn't dissipate for a long time. At the same time, everyone present knew that Xiao Chen had killed the Marquis of the Black Emperor sect. That naturally meant that there would be a battle between the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect, and it was likely that it would erupt soon. A martial marquis had been killed. With the overbearing style of the Black Emperor sect, they would definitely not let the matter rest. As for the Sword School, from the looks of it, they would probably not give in either. As such, there was only one battle left. However, facing this battle between the 2 sects, the sect leaders present were not confident. If it was before, everyone would probably think that the Sword sect would lose without hesitation. But now, the Sword sect could no longer be mentioned in the same breath. With the addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others, as well as the alliance of the family Nangong, the strength of the Sword sect had increased greatly. Under such circumstances, the Black Emperor sect would definitely be afraid, so it was hard to say who would win or lose. Not paying attention to the expressions of the sect leaders, Xiao Chen waved his hand and the disciples of the Sword sect carried the corpses of the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect away, leaving only a trail of blood that was still eye-catching. After dealing with the corpses of the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect, a smile appeared on Xiao Chen's face once again. It was as if nothing had happened just now. Xiao Chen said with a chuckle as he swept his gaze across the sect leaders present. Everyone, there's no need to take that little episode to heart. Let's get back to business. I've already said the reason why we're holding the Sword sect assembly today. What I want to say is that since we're all native forces of the Jian province, we're naturally bound together for good or ill. It can be said that we're all sitting on the same boat, so we should be united. At this point, Xiao Chen paused for a moment before continuing. Therefore, as the overlord of the Sword sect, the Sword sect is duty-bound for the development of the Jian province. Thus, I've decided to recruit the elite disciples of your families or sections. Each of your families will have a spot to let the younger generation of your family join the Sword sect to cultivate. Of course, this person will naturally pass the test of the Sword sect. In a few days, the Sword sect will select the most talented people to join the Sword sect. Xiao Chen's words were very casual, but hearing this, the expressions of all the sect leaders present changed greatly, and a strong sense of resistance flashed through their eyes. Taking in the changes in everyone's expressions, Xiao Chen smiled and took the initiative to raise his cup. Come, everyone, let's drink another cup. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1950. He did not care whether the sect leaders agreed or not. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen raised his cup and drained it in one gulp. Then, his gaze landed on the various sect leaders. Facing Xiao Chen's gaze, to be honest, the the various sect leaders did not want to drink this cup of wine at all. This was because they knew the meaning behind Xiao Chen's word. What was it about selecting elite disciples to enter the sword sect? It seemed like an opportunity, but in reality, it was to send people to the sword sect as hostages. Furthermore, Xiao Chen had just said that this time, it was not the sect leaders who sent people over, but the people from the sword sect who personally came to pick them. As a result, there was no chance of them passing off as fake pearls. Thinking about it, if the people from the sword sect personally came to pick them, then there was no doubt that they would definitely choose those with sufficient qualifications. Once these people were selected to enter the sword sect, they might be able to obtain better treatment, but on the other hand, if anyone had any ill intentions, then these people would definitely be the first to die, and would become hostages. Xiao Chen was openly asking for hostages from the various sect leaders present. His goal was to better control the Jian province, and regarding this, the various sect leaders had no way to refuse. Perhaps before today, some of these sect leaders might have refused, but now, after seeing Xiao Chen kill the Black Emperor sect's Wu Ho with their own eyes, no one dared to object. Even the Black Emperor sect's Wu Ho dared to kill them. The sect leaders did not think that Xiao Chen would not dare to kill them. And from Xiao Chen's previous actions, if anyone dared to object, they would definitely die on the spot, without a doubt. Even though they did not dare to do so in their hearts, the sect leaders still had no choice but to drink this cup of wine. The originally mellow and rich wine, however, at this moment, when the sect leaders drank it, it was extremely bitter. Seeing that all the sect leaders had finished their drinks, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Haha, good. I understand your intentions. You can rest assured that when these elites enter my sword sect, I will do my best to nurture them. In the future, they will definitely become the perfect successors of your forces." As soon as Xiao Chen said this, the faces of the sect leaders turned even uglier. A bitter smile appeared on their faces. It seemed that they had underestimated Xiao Chen. He had thought that Xiao Chen had only allowed these people to enter the sword sect as hostages, but now it seemed that things weren't that simple. Xiao Chen's actions did indeed have the intention of letting these people enter the sword sect as hostages, but this was definitely not the most important thing. Xiao Chen's true goal was to completely control the sword province in the future and completely forge the sword province into an iron plate. Thinking about it, it was no exaggeration to say that these people that Xiao Chen had chosen this time were absolutely the true core disciples of the various forces in the sword province. They might be the legitimate sons of the various sect leaders, or they might be the personal disciples of the various sect leaders, and so on. These people were the closest to the sect leaders present. Once they entered the sword sect and lived in the sword sect for a long time, Xiao Chen would have plenty of time to instill their loyalty to the sword sect and subtly influence them. In this way, when they grew up in such an environment, their loyalty to the sword sect would definitely reach an unimaginable level. At that time, when these people had cultivated successfully, with their original status in their respective forces and the support of the sword sect, it wasn't impossible for them to return to their respective forces and become the new sect leaders. Once these people became the sect leaders of the various forces in the sword province, it was conceivable that the entire sword province would be completely under Xiao Chen's and the sword sect's control. There would be no need to worry about anyone betraying the sword sect at all. Xiao Chen's plan was indeed very far-fetched because it would take at least 100 years for these people to grow up. It was a very long time, but from another perspective, this was also a way to get things done once and for all. As long as these people grew up, Xiao Chen would no longer have to worry about the internal problems of the sword province, nor would he have to worry about the various forces in the sword province having ulterior motives. After guessing Xiao Chen's true intention, not only the sect leaders, but even Song Xing and the others also felt admiration for Xiao Chen. To be able to see so far at such a young age was truly something that ordinary people couldn't do. With a faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth, Xiao Chen didn't care about what the people present thought. In any case, the matter had already been decided. It was too late to regret it now. After taking their seats, the next part of the banquet was meaningless. However, what needed to be taught had already been taught. Next, Xiao Chen also gave some rewards to the sect leaders present. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't cheap either. The strategy of using the carrot as a stick finally allowed Xiao Chen to take control of the situation in the Sword Province. Looking at the expressions of these sect leaders, Xiao Chen believed that as long as the sword sect didn't fall, they definitely wouldn't dare to do anything unnecessary. This made Xiao Chen secretly relieved. The atmosphere of the banquet wasn't very high. At least, when Xiao Chen was present, the sect leaders seemed a little uneasy. Xiao Chen naturally felt this. Therefore, halfway through the banquet, Xiao Chen left with Qin Shuru and the 5 girls, as well as his parents. With a different status, many things were naturally different from before. For example, if Xiao Chen was present, the sect leaders would definitely not be able to drink to their heart's content. After Xiao Chen left, the atmosphere in the banquet hall clearly became lively. After returning to his cave residence, Xiao Chen sighed softly. The position of sect leader seems to be limitless, but it's also very lonely. With a high position, it was destined that there would be fewer and fewer people around him. Even if it was Cang Xing, Yang Song, and the others, Xiao Chen knew that it was impossible for them to become friends. This was because there were some things that Cang Xing and the others couldn't say to Xiao Chen, and they also didn't dare to say to Xiao Chen. There are fewer and fewer people I can confide in, Xiao Chen lamented. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Every hero was like that. Because of their noble status, it was natural that people would fear them. And with fear, the distance between them would naturally be pulled apart. After sighing softly, Xiao Chen didn't think too much about it. After chatting with Qin Shuru and the other girls for a while, he directly went to cultivate. As for the banquet, Xiao Chen didn't need to worry too much about it. Only Yang Song and the others would handle it. Xiao Chen's current priority was still to improve his own cultivation. While Xiao Chen was cultivating, in a cave residence in the Black Emperor sect far away in Bazhou. This cave residence belonged to Tiger King Zhao Qinfeng, one of the 4 great princes of the Black Emperor sect. At this moment, Zhao Qinfeng was originally cultivating when an elder suddenly rushed in. He looked at Zhao Qinfeng and said nervously, "Your Majesty, something has happened. Marquis Jinbo is dead." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.